You haven't been employed since you stopped being a barman in 1969. How have you made your living since then?
Well, I haven't made my living. I like many Republicans, live on a sort of the charity of people. It's very, very simple. I don't live at home. I live wherever I happen to be.
Do you change house every night?
Well, I change house as security demands. And there are many people in the same situation. We live a lifestyle which is fairly abnormal, but which doesn't cost an awful lot. I mean, all we want is 2 square meals a day in Shoutout.
Do you not get paid a salary full-time by Sinn Féin as a vice president?
No.
I thought, if not you, others full-time workers are paid by Sinn Féin.
Well, I'm not paid. I mean, anybody that's working full-time obviously has to have petrol money. Obviously, if you want to smoke, you get money for a smoke. But we don't draw a salary.
You just live from...
Just live from day to day. I mean, I have no great material needs.
In what capacity did you attend the negotiations with Mr. Whitelaw in 1972?
Well, I was interned in 1972, in March of 1972. I was released in June or July, I'm not sure just exactly when. That was my first indication that anything was happening. Myself and Dahi O'Connell went along to negotiate.
But they didn't have you there as a political organiser, did they?
Oh, of course they had me there as a negotiator.
Right, but in what capacity were you there?
I was there as part of a negotiating team.
Of the IRA?
Of the Republican movement.
Was that what it was called?
Well, that's what it's always been called.
It was called then a group of IRA negotiators trying to negotiate a truce.
Well, I mean, presumably then Mr. Whitelaw broke the law.
He is allowed to deal with whoever he wants as a minister, is he not?
Oh, I don't know, that's his program.
I mean, he certainly met with people who had been sentenced as members of the IRA as well. I'm just asking you, if you say I'm not, but in what capacity were you there?
Well, I was there as part of a negotiating team. I went and negotiated a truce. The truce terms were acceptable to both the British government and the IRA. Part of those truce terms were military arrangements. Part of them were a meeting between a Republican delegation, which put the Republican demands to Whitelaw in London.
You have written in a pamphlet about, in response to the peace movement about conscience. And you said that Republicans must ensure that our cause and our methods remain within the bounds of our consciences, and we must ensure that our consciences are dictated to by our concern for the welfare of our people. Now, do you have it on your conscience, some of the things that have happened? The innocent victims of the IRA, the Le Mans bombing, which killed a lot of innocent people.
Well, I regret, as anyone regrets anyone being killed. I even regret, as it may surprise you, British soldiers being killed. But I mean, it isn't on my conscience that these things happen. Each one of us, and we could maybe take 15 or 20 minutes to answer that question in full, right? But each one of us knows that for which they are responsible, right? And each one of us at some period in time is going to meet God. Right? Now, I'm happy enough, right, as that in my contribution that I have tried to live by my standards. Right? That isn't to say that I'm a perfect person, I am not.
And it's not on your conscience that the sort of things you've advocated have helped?
Well, what have I advocated?
Well, in advocating the support of the armed struggle, you have helped fill the prisons with young men, you have helped fill the cemeteries with young men.
I mean, the situation very, very simple.
Young Catholic men.
The situation very, very simply, that there have been hundreds of thousands of young men and young women have gone through prisons, right? And the responsibility for that, I mean, before my time, lay with the British government, and the responsibility for that during my time. I haven't anyone in prison. The British government has people in prison. I didn't bring British troops into this country. The British government brought British troops into this country. I didn't destabilise the whole living standards of ordinary people by imposing a gerrymandered situation. The British government did that.
But you don't have it on your conscience then?
No, of course not.
Any of this?
No,
any of the innocent victims, or any of the young men, the young Catholic men who have followed you into prison to their deaths?
None at all. The situation very, very simply is this, and I've said it categorically. The responsibility for the problems in Ireland is a British responsibility. Those people who resist that have my support. I will defend their right to resist it. I'll defend it with anyone, I'll debate it with anyone. They have the right, just as much as an English person would have the right, to rise up and resist for an oppression in England.
It sounds as if you're prepared to use any means, however violent, however barbaric in the end, to achieve your aim.
Well, that's a ridiculous question.
Now, is it true?
But of course it isn't true. I mean, the situation is, can I appeal on this television programme for the British government to please leave our country? And will they leave? will they leave? Now, the British government doesn't give anyone a choice.
Is your own persistent denial of being a member of the IRA, is that a matter to do with the law because it's an illegal organisation and therefore you can't admit it? Or have you made a conscious decision to be separate from it?
Well, I mean, the situation of my membership of the IRA is just that I'm not a member of the IRA, and that's a de facto situation. The persistence, I don't go around persistent. You know, I don't go around saying I'm not in the IRA, I'm not in the IRA. Well, every so often somebody says I am and I deny it.
You were charged with it and
yes.
You denied it persistently.
Yes, that's right. And the charge didn't stand up in court. I wasn't discharged on the basis of my denial.
Is it not true, though, that you have a decisive voice in the activities of the IRA?
No. I mean, the IRA knows its own business best. The IRA conducts its own business as it sees best. Even physically, I don't even know why this is a pertinent question, but even physically it would be impossible for me to be tied up with what I'm tied up politically and be able to have time to devote to any other activities. And that's been further exacerbated by the fact that I'm involved in that constituency matter. So it just isn't. There just aren't enough of me to go around. When I was in prison, how did the IRA go on? You know, I mean, the whole question's all full of irrelevancies.
At what point does what you call the armed struggle, this campaign, essentially a murder, at what point does that cease?
Sinn Féin doesn't advocate a campaign of murder. Sinn Féin supports politically and defends the right of people as legitimate action to resist British rule.
But it also has a resolution which you read out
yes.
at your party conference only last month, right. That all its candidates must be unambivalent in support of the armed struggle. Right. Now that is a campaign of murder.
Well, let me just...
And it was passed, wasn't it? Without
anybody objecting. And that's always been the Sinn Féin position, and it's been nothing new. Now, the British government are unambivalent in their support of what happens in this country. There's no one goes along and awards IRA men medals when they kill civilians. Yet the British government, when British troops wantonly and deliberately and consciously opened fire and killed civilians in Derry, the British government awarded the person in charge medals.
Brings them to trial.
No, it didn't bring the people in Bloody Sunday to trial. Now, the British government doesn't bring the people. It's okay for the British government to go and murder people in the Argentine and to be applauded for their actions.
Well, that is another argument.
It isn't another argument. I mean, if it's legitimate for the British government, right, to resist what they see as oppression by the Argentines, it's certainly, very, very certainly legitimate for Irish people in their own country. Remove the British Protestant people and Catholic people who are not divided on theological arguments, but who are only divided because one section was given a marginal privilege over the other. Remove the prop which creates that, and we can get down as a free people to deciding and planning our own destinies.
If they chose, on your system of values now, yes. If they chose to feel oppressed by you, yes. Would they not have the right that you claim to fight against you and throw you out of their part of Ireland?
As they say it, they may, right? But there's no...
Well, what's the difference?
Well, the difference is very, very simply that there is no way that a minority, a political minority, not an ethnic minority, not even a religious minority, that a minority, which is a political minority of, at the moment, loyalism, right, who are prepared...
They're a majority, of course, in Northern Ireland.
But if you carve up a country, anybody can be a majority.
But it's 60 years on, isn't it?
And of course, but who's false that?
They're different people.
But I mean, they're not a different people. How are they a different people?
Well, how are they the same people?
Well, how are they? You said they're different people.
But they're different people. They have different allegiances. They have a different culture. They have, most of them, a different religion. All they happen to do is to share the same island with you.
They haven't got different values, right? They are as oppressed as we are, right? Secondly, they have not got a different culture. And thirdly, they have not got different allegiances, at least not long-standing allegiances. The allegiance from loyalists, right, to the British Crown, and it says this in many, like the Orange Oath and so on, will give their allegiance to the English Crown for as long as the English Crown protects the Protestant ascendancy. So you have a catch-22 situation.
But now, the bottom line in that still is, if they won't accept it, what will you do?
Well, I mean, that depends on her...
Because they've said they won't accept it.
But that depends on how that non-acceptance manifests itself.
Well, that's why I come to my question. When does the armed struggle end?
Well, the armed struggle, obviously, I mean, as far as I would be concerned, ends when the British government has withdrawn its forces from this country. and when it has dismantled all its colonial institutions in this country. I mean, that's as far as I can see. That's against...
And if the Protestant and Unionist community, call them what you will, or the majority of Northern Ireland refuse to accept what you then offer to them, my question is, what will you do to them?
Well, that remains... I can't see that, in all honesty, happening. I mean, if we're talking about a situation where a section of the loyalist population raise up in arms, well, obviously the people against whom they raise up have the right to defend themselves. The problem is with the armed militia, is with the UDR and the RUC, who have British guns. And obviously the British are going to have to disarm their own forces, and the RUC and the UDR are part of their forces.
So we would, to get to your stage of removing the British prop, we would have to deliver to you the Protestant majority in Northern Ireland, defenceless, without British guns, as you say, in the UDR, without guns for the RUC.
Well,
I'm asking you.
Right. Oh, of course. I mean, you must dismantle. I mean, it's no use to withdrawing some lad who's in the British Army and sending him back home and leaving another British soldier who just happens to be from Limavady here, upholding. I mean, the British withdrew from the 26 counties on the basis that they could preserve British interests with an economy of British lives. But the same thing can't happen again. There's no use, I mean, the whole strife continuing and the British leaving a rear guard defence for their interests and domestic forces. If the thing is going to be dealt with honestly, and the British government haven't got either the integrity at this moment in time or the honesty to deal with the situations that deserve to be dealt with.
In the course of our interviews with a number of people who've known you, people who've observed you, many of them have said that you're a man of great ability. But Tim Pat Coogan has also said that you are the movement's shogun, the supremo. Hal McCusker, that your hands are drenched in blood. Ian Paisley, that you're associated with murderers, and the Secretary of State, that you're one of a number of bad men. What do you reply to that?
Well, I mean, I've really nothing to say about it. They see things obviously from their own political position. They can make the statements they make as entirely up to themselves. All I know, right, I'm not going to defend my position and the answer to sort of scurrilous allegations from I would respect Tim Pat Coogan to some degree because he's not directly involved, but not from Harold McCusker, not from Ian Paisley, who's an arch demagogue, and not certainly from James Fryer. I challenged James Fryer last month to stand in West Belfast in the election. Who does he represent here in this country? Doesn't represent anyone. Whatever James Fryer says is meaningless. He's only here, obviously, to do a job, which he's very well paid to do. But I'm not getting well paid to do what I'm doing. No one's forcing me to do what I'm doing. I am only one of a large group of people who believe that the British shouldn't be here, who believe that our people can live in peace and prosperity in the absence of the British government, and who have dedicated a certain amount of their time into trying to achieve that situation. And that's it. It's very, very simple.
Welcome to our broadcast tonight. Gerry Adams, head of the Sinn Féin, the political arm of the Irish Republican Army. He is in New York for the second time in 7 months after being barred from this country for 20 years. And actor Tim Robbins, his latest movie is called The Shawshank Redemption. We begin with Northern Ireland. After 25 years of violence and little reason for hope, the IRA announced a complete cessation of military operations last month. Gerry Adams is in the middle of a 2-week tour of the United States, during which he has reiterated his call for a united Ireland without a British role, and I'm pleased to have him back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm very glad to be back.
It's good to have you back. We had a lot of talk after you were here for the last time. Did that visit to the United States, how long ago, 6 months ago, when was
February.
it? Make a difference when you got back to Northern Ireland in terms of what the IRA announced?
Absolutely. I think it was, if you like, the American piece of the jigsaw. And when President Clinton gave me the visa to come here, he sent a very encouraging, a very positive, a politically symbolic signal back to Ireland, back to the British government, and back to the broad nationalist family and Republican family in Ireland. And can I say something else that you may be interested in as a broadcaster? You will recall that the last time I was here, that my voice could not be heard on British television.
Right.
Now, it's no accident that this time before I come back, the British changed that. And they changed it because programs like this and broadcasters like you were amazed at the bizarre craziness of an actor's voice being used, and the British were embarrassed. And that's why that was changed.
What else? I want to get to what caused you in the IRA to change its policy. But what other changes have taken place since the dramatic announcement? What's changed? What's opened up for you?
Well, could I just sketch out very briefly the build-up to
Sure.
the announcement? And essentially, I spoke earlier of an American piece of the jigsaw. John Hume, who is the leader of the SDLP, and myself got together, and if you like, we had a consensus, which was a consensus among nationalists in the north of Ireland. And then Irish Prime Minister Albert Reynolds came in behind that, so you had nationalist Ireland, and then Irish America, and the broader American opinion added the package, which created the conditions, which allowed, I believe, the IRA to take what was a very courageous and bold step. We still haven't got peace. I mean, the IRA announcement is a month old. Since then, a number of Catholics have been killed. There are upwards of 30,000 heavily armed combat troops in an area which is slightly smaller than the state of Maine. We have bomb attacks on my offices in Belfast. We have had bomb attacks on the homes of Sinn Féin families and on other Catholics. The weekend I left Ireland, there was a mass murder attack against Catholics in the north of Belfast, and within the last 36 hours there was another attempted killing. So we have had the IRA with its complete cessation of military operations. We have had not got a response from the British or from their allies in the Loyalist death squads. On the positive side, we have had an expectation, a hope within Ireland that we are going to move from this threshold of a new era into a new era.
Just for the benefit of people who did not read the announcement, why, after 20 plus years and all those killings, did the IRA change its policy?
Well, one would have to go into some detail. I have always been of a view, and I said this 15 years ago, that there were no military victories. We have a political problem, it needs a political solution. What the British did was to militarize the problem. Douglas Hurd, who I think was here last night.
Yes, he was.
I met him perhaps 8 years ago.
When he served?
When he was a minister.
Right.
And we discussed and I argued what I'm arguing now. So when you get then, maybe 6 years ago, another British minister, a man called Peter Brooke, echoing to some degree what I had said, and he said that the IRA could not be militarily defeated. That, I think, sent a very strong signal, because there are only two ways to end wars. One side beats the other, one side surrenders, or there's a negotiated settlement. And Sinn Féin commenced to try and build initiatives to bring about a negotiated settlement.
But you seem to want to say that the terrorism in Northern Ireland on the part of the IRA was in some way a response to the British Army presence, rather than simply to terrorize them into going back to London.
Well, I don't want to get into, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But if the British were not in Ireland, there'd be no conflict. There'd certainly be no Irish Republican Army. There certainly would have not been resistance going back over most of this century. And similarly, in any colonial situation, when you have an outside power, one has to ask the question, what right have the British government got to do and got to have in Ireland? What right have they to do?
Well, I'll tell you what they would say. The majority of the people of Northern Ireland want them there.
Well, now
that's what they would say. And they would also say that you represent, 10% of the people.
Well, we actually represent 12.5%.
Okay, 12.5. But that's what they say. And Douglas Hurd here last night repeatedly made that point. Well, and how many people does Gerry Adams represent?
Okay, well, I have to ask Mr. Hurd how many people does he represent in Ireland. He doesn't represent one voter. Not one person in Ireland voted for or was given the opportunity to vote for Mr. Hurd. Now, what Sinn Féin wants to do is to bring our mandate, and I recognise that it's a small one, but it's a very significant one, because in the last 2 years, I have buried 13 members of Sinn Féin. I've buried women members, I've buried elected councillors. I've also buried 7 people, the children, the partners, the wives of Sinn Féin activists.
But as soon as you say that, Gerry, as you know, I mean, there are families
Absolutely.
of Unionists,
Absolutely.
and there's families of British soldiers who buried their loved ones too because they suffered from terrorism by the IRA.
Well,
you know, and you've got people that surround you and are part of your entourage, in a sense, who've been in prison because of terrorist acts, right?
Okay, well, let me deal with that second point in a moment,
Okay.
Charlie, if I could. You see, the reason why I made that point about Sinn Féin activists being killed was to put into focus the difficulties under which Sinn Féin labours. Because anyone who knows politics know you need activists, you need supporters, you need people to sign up. Now, to sign up for Sinn Féin was to sign a death warrant. So if you see the 12.5%, you have to see it against the background of terrorism against our party. Secondly, I acknowledged, not here in New York, but back in Belfast, the hurt which Republicans have inflicted upon others. I recognise that.
Yeah. You, in fact, apologise for the violence on the part of the IRA.
I want to see the people of Ireland, and I have confidence in the Protestant, the Unionist people of Ireland, to join with the rest of us in creating a new Ireland. In relation to the people who are travelling with me, I'm very happy and satisfied to have such fine people travelling with me.
I'm not doubting that. I'm just making the point that you're not proud to have them with you, and there's no secret of their activities and the fact that they've been in prison for bombings and for killing people.
No, but I think, Charlie, this is very important. I mean, people have seen the film In the Name of the Father.
Right.
When I met Senator Kennedy the other day, I also met Paul Hill. Paul Hill was in prison.
Paul Hill.
And we were saying back in Ireland.
Paul Hill is married to
Courtney Kennedy.
Courtney Kennedy,
He's one of the
Robert Kennedy's
4.
daughter.
The Birmingham 6 were in prison. I could give you numerous. The Ballymurphy 7. So I mean, British justice sometimes finds people innocent until proven Irish.
And American justice too. Sometimes there are people imprisoned in America who didn't. But at the same time, there are people who commit terrorist acts in the interest of political objectives, who in fact go to prison because they're guilty of those terrorist acts, and they continue to engage in public discourse. And I make that point just in that context, that there are a lot of people who have suffered violence inflicted on them on both sides, and I assume that one of the reasons we are here now at this time in history is because the IRA said, this is not working. Enough of this. We got to find a better way. In fact, that was your message when you came here in February, was it not?
Absolutely, and I think what the IRA have done has been to bring all of us in Ireland to a very critical juncture in our history, and they brought all of us to a very decisive crossroads in the history of Anglo-Irish relationships, because here we have, as we approach the end of this century, an opportunity to build a lasting and permanent peace in our country so that no one, British soldiers, civilians, non-combatants, Irish Republican volunteers, that no one will ever have to suffer what people have suffered so far. And I think it's important to set the past behind us and to move the entire situation forward.
A couple of points about that. Number one, you must be disappointed that President Clinton, after seeing other people from Ireland in the last several months and preceding your visit here, did not see you. There was a question today of the President's press secretary. Does the President have any plans to meet with Gerry Adams? No, the President does not. He will meet with officials from the State Department and the White House at the working level, but not here. I assume that's what you...
Well, I think that President Clinton has engaged positively in this process.
You're not disappointed that he wouldn't meet with you?
Well, let's wait until we get to Washington. I think that he will deal with us at an appropriate level. And I think that we who call for parity of esteem back in Ireland, and we have support right across the political spectrum here in the USA for parity of esteem and equality of treatment in Ireland, and Mr. Clinton supports that. So I'm quite sure that he won't have one attitude towards Ireland and another attitude towards the USA.
Well, are you saying that you think that what they said today will not be the end result, that in fact you will see the President during this visit?
This is my first knowledge of this. It's a matter for President Clinton. I couldn't come to your country and try to dictate to your government when I object so much to what a government does in my country. I'm very pleased to be here. It's been a very positive experience. We have engaged, we have enlisted support. We're moving the process forward.
You will, though, be disappointed if the President does not see you after the meetings he's had with other Irish
I am quite
officials.
convinced that President Clinton and I will, whenever it is appropriate, meet to enjoy the fruits of the peace process in Ireland and to move the peace process forward.
If he does not see you, do you think it'll be because of pressure from John Major?
Well, you must have an inside line, because Mr. Major has tried everything. First of all, to stop me from coming here. Second of all, to limit my access even to programs like this, to a whole range of restrictions. So the British government want the paper wall, which they have built around Ireland, to continue. And President Clinton, I think, has helped to breach that wall. And that's not the British government.
So he's played a positive role.
Absolutely. And
you'd like to see him, to thank him for that?
Well, I think that I want to thank everyone who has played a positive role, including President Clinton. And I think we have to remind the British Prime Minister that their jurisdiction doesn't extend to this United States.
As you mentioned, the Foreign Secretary was here yesterday, and he made a couple of points. I mentioned one about how many supporters did you have. The other point he continued to make, and others have made, and there has been some change in this, is, are you prepared now to say that this is a permanent cessation? You have said it ought to be a permanent peace. Are you prepared now to say it's a permanent cessation?
Well, I think this is a distraction, Charlie. The British Prime Minister...
Why allow it to be, though? You could stop it from being a distraction.
Well, I tell you, if I may, the British Prime Minister said that he wanted Sinn Féin to go a little bit further. And perhaps we mightn't want to use the word permanent, but we should say that the Irish Prime Minister had it right. And I wrote an article in the Irish Times, which is the paper of record in Ireland, and I said that President Clinton and Albert Rounds, the Irish Prime Minister, had correctly and positively responded to the IRA announcement. And the British government said, well, now that's not so bad, that's fair enough. And they engaged almost in a word game. But we wanted to reassure them, and whatever formulation they sought, we gave. And I then came to a conclusion. But the British government, I think this is the right conclusion, are engaging in is a strategic, tactical game to reduce the significance of the IRA initiative. It's a month old. Despite the provocations we dealt with at the beginning of this interview, there's not a whisper of dissent in the Republican ranks. Now, my view of it is
not a whisper of dissent in terms of members of the IRA and people who support the IRA dissenting from the initiative that's taken place a month ago.
Not a whisper.
No one's dissenting from that.
No
in fact, there's a universal consensus of support for the action and the words taken so far.
Absolutely. And what Mr. Major needs to do is to match his deeds, match his words with deeds, because my view now is, if the IRA had said permanently at that time, Mr. Major would be saying, well, they didn't say complete.
Yeah.
And this is the ridiculous situation that we've got into. That we
so
have.
But is it just that in terms of, for you, not wanting getting into semantics? I mean, but why not simply remove it as an issue by saying, we believe this is a complete and a permanent cessation?
Well,
it's easy to do, and then they have no space to go to then.
Well,
because permanent peace means something to them, because they believe, they don't know that this might simply be a strategic move on your part.
Well, they know, and I'm very well informed, they are quite clear in their minds and in my view about the IRA's intentions. And can I go further? I think that the British government needs to move actively beyond this discussion about words. Governments throughout the world, even those who don't have English as their first language, have recognised the enormity of all of this. Now let's go back to my role as Sinn Féin president. See, I didn't write the IRA statement. Sinn Féin wasn't engaged in armed activity or of any physical force activity whatsoever. Prime Minister
because
Major,
it's a political arm.
Yes, but Prime Minister Major up until last year was engaged in discussions with Sinn Féin for almost 3 years, and he was right. Now, what was happening during that 3 years? The IRA campaign was going full blast in the occupied area and also in Britain. So here we have this bizarre situation that when the IRA campaign was going, the Prime Minister authorised talks with us when he hadn't the notion of a peace settlement. Now, when the IRA has stopped and there's a peace settlement on the horizon, he refuses to talk to us. Now, explain the logic of that situation to me, because it's beyond me. And then I also have to...
In other words, basically what you're saying is once we announce we're for peace, the Prime Minister doesn't want to talk to us.
Yes. No.
But when we didn't announce for peace and he thought we were engaged in terrorist activities, he was willing to talk to at least the political arm of the IRA.
Well, I also was interned by the British government And I was released from internment, and I was flown to London to talk to British cabinet ministers at the time when I didn't have an electoral mandate. So we have a crazy situation and an expedient attitude by the British government, and all of this sort of argues for the need for this moment for peace to be converted into a completely new era so that the Irish people can make our own history.
What would they have to give you, either in terms of assurances or deed, in order to have you say these words they want to hear you say? Before you answer that, let me have you take a look at what Douglas Hurd. I don't know, did you see this last night?
No, I didn't.
Okay, here it is. This is a tape of an interview I did last night with Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd. Here it is. What do you need to see to believe that this is a permanent ceasefire on the part of the IRA?
Well, it would be good if you could get him to say so.
Yes.
You know, you could play a part in this. He's dancing around the point. You know, we've had 25 years of troubles. Troubles is the Irish word for terrorism. And he's been involved in that. He's been the leader of the political wing of the IRA. That's 25 years of killing. And now we've had just over 25 days when there's been no killing by the IRA. And that's very, very welcome. But if you were sitting in Northern Ireland tonight, you'd want a bit more than just that, to be sure.
Experienced 25 years of violence and perhaps
to be sure that this man and his people, his team, are moving from trying to persuade people with bombs and bullets to trying to persuade people by speeches and voting and the ordinary political process. So that's what it's about. And you could, if he could just say that would be a help. But he's dancing around the point.
Why is he dancing around?
Well,
what is his motivation?
Well, that I don't know. They decided that the IRA obviously decided the armed struggle, their word for killing people, wasn't working. So they called it off, and that's very welcome. But the people in Northern Ireland, and we, the British government responsible for them, need to know that this is for sure and permanent, and that it's not just a tactic. Now, it's going quite well because we have had these days of peace. And things have been said which have been helpful, but it's not sure. And before we actually start the clock ticking, before we actually get a 3-month period and then into talks, we do need to be a bit clearer than we are now. You could help.
Help by getting him to say this is a permanent.
Yes, we don't say, it doesn't have to use the word permanent.
Permanent.
Yes, if you look up your dictionary tonight, words which, you know, it's for good, that it's there for keeps. You know, he let him choose his own words.
What do you think?
Charlie, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because it's why can't Mr. Hurd sit with me in London? It's really a sort of a
If I had invited you here last night, you would have been here.
Of course I would have. Let me say, I was invited by a British Labour MP to go to England to talk about this peace process. The response of Douglas Hurd was to ban me from travelling to England. Now, it's really unique that I come here and in your studio that a British foreign minister talks to me through an edited record of a show last night. Why can't we sit down and talk about these matters? And also, I've spoken to the guy before. We sat across the table in Ballymurphy and West Belfast and discussed these matters.
Well, I remember when you were on the broadcast last time, you asked me to please come to Ireland and get him to come to Ireland.
Yes,
we would do something there
absolutely.
in the same context that we've done something. But why don't you just, not give them this rhetorical point about permanent and say...
Well, it's hard to understand, Charlie, because he said that we don't want him to use the word...
It's a little bit like you're not going to give it until they give something,
No,
so
well,
there's a kind of Mexican standoff.
Well, not at all, you see,
Or
because...
Irish standoff.
Well, not at all. It's a British standoff. See, the Irish have moved. The IRA have called the complete cessation of its military operations. That man on that screen has 30,000 heavily armed combat troops in my country. In my country.
He will say that's because there were so many acts of terrorism trying to drive...
Well, let him say that to me, but even, I'm not talking about what he would or would not say. He's well able to speak for himself, and let's not be too distracted here.
No.
But
I should make this point. You have said, because I've followed this rather closely, you have said in public pronouncement that the IRA is in favor of a permanent peace.
Absolutely.
You just have not said it officially to satisfy them.
Well, I think that man, and I watched his performance there, was, for a child to give excuses for not talking.
All right, well,
he's given excuses for not talking.
All right, watch this then. Another clip from last night with Douglas Hurd. We couldn't bring him at the same table, so we'll do it this way again. Here it is, the Foreign Secretary last night.
What's non-negotiable is the principle of consent. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom because that's what most people in Northern Ireland want. What Gerry Adams and some others say is, regardless of what people want, this should be a united Ireland. Just as others might say, is regardless of what people want, there has to be the status quo. We say, it is for the people there to decide. At the moment, it's very clear, and I think likely to remain so for a long time, that most people there want to belong to the United Kingdom. But this is the principle of consent in action, and that's not negotiable.
And Gerry Adams wants all the people of Ireland to vote on that.
What the Irish government said and the British government says is, let it be on the principle of consent, taken separately in each part of Ireland, so that the North can't be coerced into unity if that's not what most people in the North want.
Can you imagine?
That's realism too.
Can you imagine circumstances in which the people of Northern Ireland will like to take leave of the United Kingdom?
I think I don't see the circumstances now. I think it's very unlikely. But that's not for me to decide, it's for them.
What's going to happen, despite the reluctance and the hesitancy of the British government, is that the Irish people are going to have peace.
But what do you say to his point about, I said, what's non-negotiable? And he said the idea of consent.
Well,
that the people in Northern Ireland have to consent,
everything,
not to be part.
Everything, Charlie, should be negotiable. Everything should go on the table and should be discussed out. Everything should be a matter to seek agreement upon. And of course we will have to measure how we get that agreement. And of course we cannot build a united Ireland without the assent and the consent of all sections of our people. And let me say this, Douglas Hurd has no right to dictate to any section of the Irish people how we should live. But the Unionists are my people. They're not his people.
Your people because?
Because they live on the island of Ireland. They're Irish people.
But they would say we want to be part of the British Empire.
Well, let's sit down. The British don't have an empire. Mr. Hurd must have done a good slush job. The British don't have an empire, and that's probably what's wrong with them, that some of them imagine in their head that they still have. But the point I'm making is that Ireland without the Unionists, Ireland without the Protestants, is not the type of Ireland that I would want. I haven't struggled, and those who struggle with me have not struggled for some sort of exclusive, marginalised section of our people. We want all of our people.
What do those people in Northern Ireland have to say? What right do you give them to speak to their own future?
Talk, sit down, discuss it out.
But the end has to be that they give up their relationship. They give up their relationship with Britain and become part of Ireland. That's what the end has to be.
Well, they are part of Ireland, but that's what I want to convince them of. That's what I want.
You want to convince them that they are wrong and they're thinking that they should maintain their allegiance to Britain.
Well, they, you see, and this is an important thing, and bring a unionist on here and talk about this, because the unionists feel betrayed by Douglas Hurd, because Douglas Hurd doesn't represent their interests, and they know that because they were left. They were left to marginalise us, to discriminate against us, to repress us, and to carry it for Britain. And now they're carrying the can. And they don't like it. And they know the British are going to dump them. And what we want to do is to embrace them as part of a new Ireland and a great Ireland. And that isn't just Sinn Féin's view, it's the Dublin government's view also.
All right. Tell me about the meeting with Rosa Parks.
Well, when I was...
Gee, this is one of the great civil rights figures in American history. She refused to sit at the back of the bus and had a significant thing to do in Montgomery with the development of the civil rights.
When Rosa Parks did that movement, I was about 9 years old. And some 7 years later, I became part of a fledgling civil rights movement back in Ireland. And the 60s, for those of us old enough to remember it, was a decade of great promise, of the Beatles and Bob Dylan, of the American civil rights movement, of students' movement throughout Europe. We went out to look for votes. And I was innocently naive. I thought, like a whole lot of other people, if you asked for the right to vote, it would be given to you. Now, here in the States, Rosa Parks gave us an example. She refused to sit on the back of the bus. She developed as a symbol and as an active participant in civil disobedience squats, sit-ins. And I went through all of that, squats and sit-ins and civil disobedience back home in Ireland. We stole the song, "We Shall Overcome." We stole the song, "We Shall Not Be Moved." And I never believed that it would be my honour to come and meet Rosa Parks. And when I had the opportunity to go, I brought from Ireland Waterford Crystal. And on behalf of women in Ireland, women like Merle Drum, killed in this struggle, like young Sheena Campbell, killed in this struggle, like Teresa Clinton or Maria Farrell. It was my pleasure and humble honour to give to Rosa Parks on behalf of Irish people.
You know,
that small gift.
You have heard this point made before, that there's such a dramatic difference in what Rosa Parks did in terms of the civil rights movement and nonviolent protest and what the IRA has been about, that to make that association, in a sense, is to assume a mantle of nonviolence and to verbalize a disservice to her principles and the principles of Martin Luther King.
Charlie, what you're doing there is patronizing Rosa Parks, because Rosa Parks knows where I'm coming from. Rosa Parks knows my background. Rosa Parks was pleased to come and receive that small token. Now, the difference is, and she also said that the struggle goes on here for civil rights and for prosperity, is that it was a domestic issue. Your government responded to it. How adequately or not is a matter for people here to judge. In the British case, it was not a domestic issue. It was them as an outside force denying us our civil rights, and they militarised the situation. They give us heavily armed troops, they give us the prison ships, they give us all of the paraphernalia of war, and none of the substance of civil reform. And that's the difference in the two situations. And I'm proud and pleased that Rosa Parks prepared to accept that gift from me on behalf of people in struggle back in Ireland. But she gave us an example in the 1960s, and it's also pertinent. It was a good marking of this new era, that a heroine of the struggle in the USA would be part, symbolically, of the new era back in Ireland.
I'll make one last point. I've got 30 seconds. What's next, and what has to happen to make this take the next step?
The discussion we're having now, Charlie, the discussion we're having now, with both governments and all the other parties around the table, shaping out our future so that no one else has to die in Ireland, and so that the Irish people can have our freedom and justice and a lasting and a permanent peace.
And if you said this announcement is for a complete and permanent cessation, and you thought that would advance the cause of peace, would you say it?
Of course.
Why don't you say it?
Because I don't believe the British government are serious about semantics. I want them to be serious, and I want them to be serious about bringing peace. Let's not look back. Let's look forward to a new and an agreed and a peaceful and a just Ireland.
As it was last time, this time I'm pleased that you came here and we could talk about what is an interesting and a very positive development in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie.
So I'm very proud, Ceann Comhairle, to stand here as an Ulsterman, as an Irish Republican from County Antrim. It is a great honour to represent Sinn Féin in any capacity, but it's especially gratifying to receive a mandate from your peers. For while you're mar huihas, a horch, the ahandina a hog a vota de Sinn Féin, agus ahandina a dobri our son Sinn Féin. I especially want to commend our candidates, including the Republican TDs here today, and their families. For almost 30 years, I represented the people of West Belfast. I am humbled and appreciative of the heroism, the generosity, and the courage of that community. And I'm equally honoured to represent the citizens of Louth and East Meath, and alongside our councillors there, I will continue the pioneering work of my predecessor, Arthur Morgan, in that Dáil Ciantar. It's also a great honour to be part of the Sinn Féin team here in the Oireachtas, and we will build upon the project started here by Queeving in 1997. Sinn Féin is an Irish Republican party. Our primary goal is a united Ireland. Our focus in this new Dáil will be to advance this goal and to deliver on our manifesto to the very best of our ability and to hold the government to account.
ach níl mise an céad duine ó bhfuil firsta á tugadh mar cheart do dála. 30 years ago this June, my friend Kieran Doherty, a political prisoner on hunger strike in the Hates blocks of Long Cache, was elected as TD for Kevin Monaghan. Paddy Agnew, another prisoner, was elected for Louth, and others including Kevin Lynch, Martin Hurson and Joe McDonnell received very sizable votes in other constituency. Cara Ella, Mairead Farrell, whose anniversary is this week, stood in Cork North Central. Bobby Sands was returned as MP for Fermanagh and South Tyrone. So here in Corda, Sinn Féin is part of a proud continuum of struggle for a real republic, for freedom and equality and against oppression, which goes back to 1916 and beyond. That oppression visited upon our people by a foreign government in past times was unacceptable, and the economic oppression suffered by citizens under a native government in these times is just as unacceptable. Caithfear stad a Corlesh, need more on differ that our policy Fine Gael agus policy Fiann a Fáil. An Blian se Caithse, Tugu, Gebeg Cudge a Bheith Fagda, chun Sobernacht and Stout Shaw don EU agus don IMF. In the election for this 31st Dáil, the people voted against corruption, sellout and economic oppression. They voted for change. The Fianna Fáil party in particular benefited from that desire. But the reality is that Fine Gael and Labour's programme for government implements Fianna Fáil's policy. Despite their promise of new ways, new approaches, new thinking, this government offers little of this. The Fine Gael and Labour programme is a far cry from the democratic programme of the First Dáil. That document declares that sovereignty extends not only to all men and women of the nation, but to all its material possessions, the nation's soil, all its resources, all the wealth and all the wealth-producing processes within the nation. Our natural resources, especially our oil and gas, which are worth billions, have been given away. As Luke Kelly put it, for what died the sons and daughters of Roisin? Was it greed? Was it greed that drove Wolfe Tone to a pauper's death and a cell of cold, wet stone? Will German, French or Dutch inscribe the epitaph of Emmet when we have sold enough of Ireland to be but strangers in it? To whom? Cashed more and you. To whom do we owe our allegiance today? To those brave men and women who fought and died, that Roisin live again with pride. Or the faceless men who for mark and dollar betray her to the highest bidder. The First Dáil was committed to a programme to improve the conditions under which the working classes live and labour. There is no whisper of this in the 211th programme for government. The reality today at Carja is that more than 100,000 children in this state live in poverty. 450,000 people are unemployed. 1,000 citizens a week are forced to emigrate. Families who cannot afford their mortgage face and fear eviction. Sinn Féin, and I call upon every other deputy here to join in this, will oppose any eviction of any family from their home. Social protections have been sliced to satisfy the diktats of our new international masters. Universal social charge, welfare cuts, stealth taxes mean people can't pay their weekly bills. The ghost estates that litter our countryside stand as monuments to corruption and greed. The programme for government does not tackle any of this. It's a right-wing programme driven by a resurgent right-wing Fine Gael party. It commits the government to implementing Fianna Fáil's austerity programme and to the madness, the absolute lunacy of pouring public money into toxic banks. and access to vital public services like healthcare, childcare and education is determined by ability to pay rather than social need. There is no meaningful job stimulus to push the economy out of recession. There are increased charges on low and middle income families in the form of water and property taxes. There will be a sell-off of strategic state assets to multinational companies whose sole interest will be profit, and Irish citizens will pay the price. This government is determined to cut 25,000 public sector jobs and further undermine our public services and our small and medium native businesses. In short, this is a Fine Gael programme for government supported by the Labour Party. Voters were told, and I quote, Gilmore for Taoiseach. Sinn Féin said, if you vote Labour, you will get Fine Gael. And this is what happened. For Hampla, Taffy, Charlie, Ata, Mian income, agus income nís Ata, Forum Ishka. Ata, Balak nís far on, Balak Ella, Slee Ella. Say sin, Shasso Suis, or son Mincher na Huron, agus son Ura. Kaifer, Searsher, Aknomiakta, Agwint Amok, Don Cheer Shaw. Ta Surinig, Eglorog, Politiact Nua. Every deputy speaking has said that citizens want new politics. And there is an alternative. There is a need and the possibility of politics that empowers and includes citizens. A politics that doesn't pander to elites and to the greedy and which seeks to build a new kind of Ireland. And that means making a stand for Ireland, standing up for our country and for our people. But if politics is reduced to this chamber, then it will be the old politics. Sinn Féin will campaign on all these issues in and out of this Parliament and across this island. And I'm calling on citizens to make a stand for themselves, for their neighbours, for their communities, for the vulnerable, for the disadvantaged. This is a time for active citizenship, for democratically and peacefully asserting our rights as Irish citizens. It cannot be left only to this Parliament. There is no more important time, no more relevant time for Republican politics and core Republican values. The people of our island were no mean people. We live in a great country. There is a genius, a brilliance, a wisdom, there's culture, history, there's tradition in our communities. We need to build on those. Kaifer Togoy or Nabuna Intaka Shaw. Agus Yanni Witch, Charlie, Tua, August Cahar, a Hushant. Sinn Féin will also oppose Fine Gael's efforts to downgrade the Irish language. We will defend working families, both urban and rural. We will demand that the government holds a referendum on the banking bailout. If you expect the people to pay, then give the people their say. We will campaign for the abolition of the universal social charge. We will hold you to your promise to reverse the cut to minimum wage, and we will oppose tooth and nail the introduction of household water charges and property tax on family homes. We will also oppose attempts to sell off or privatise state assets or public services, including the health service. Sinn Féin will continue to bring forward proposals, constructive, costed proposals to create jobs, because that's the only way out of recession to get Ireland back to work. And politicians, we believe, should lead by example. So we will bring forward legislation within 100 days to cut ministerial salaries by 40% and PD salaries by 20%. We will also raise, because Ireland is greater than 26 counties, we will also raise issues of importance to people in the north, and we will expose the economic and political damage being done by partition in both states on this island. Partition, folks, makes no political sense whatsoever. It's a barrier to prosperity. A united Ireland does make sense. A single island economy does make sense. It makes economic sense. It makes political sense. Above this chamber flies our national flag, the flag of this nation, all 32 counties of it, green, white and orange. The future unity of our people is representative and represented in these colours. Sinn Féin is proud of the leadership work of Martin McGuinness and our team in the Northern Assembly. And this government must actively support the peace process and the historic mission to make friends with our unionist neighbours on the basis of equality. To our commitment as the oldest political party here, as we seek to repair the damage done by a bad Fianna Fáiling Green Party government and to confront the bad policies that this new government will seek to implement, is to make progress on all these fronts. The Taoiseach talks about recreating our proud republic. That means, Taoiseach, giving expression to the words of the proclamation Barogra le Casca and the democratic programme of Nked Dal, which demands freedom, which demands equality, which demands sovereignty, and which demands the empowerment of citizens across all 32 counties. It means moving, Taoiseach, beyond rhetoric. Change never comes easily. All politics and life is a matter of choices. Those of us, and I'm sure there are others outside of my party, outside of our party, those of us who stand by the Republic, the real Republic, a truly national Republic, will have our work cut out in this institution. But out there, despite the distress, there is a vitality which cannot be extinguished. The Irish people may be bruised, but we're not beaten. We are not broken. We are unbowed. So, my friends, there is hope. And because of that, everything is possible. We're a bit of Margaret.
Michael Donegan there finishing Barry Cummins' report. Gerry Adams, first of all, thank you for coming into studio. Over the decades, the last 2 decades certainly and more, we have sat in television studios together, and I've often spoken about your role in the peace process and that critically important role. But tonight we're focusing on that apology in the Dáil and the victims' families of Republican violence. Those killings there, reported on in Barry's report, they were murders, weren't they?
Well, by definition, any killing of another human being by another human being is a murder, of course, and I have condemned the killing of Gardaí, of the Defence Force members who were killed, and others. I don't have any hesitation about that. I was very taken by the video. I was very taken by what the victims' families said, and clearly some of them remain traumatised, understandably, to this day. And the last man to speak, Mr. Donegan, I think, described very, very clearly what members of families who I have met, and I've met many, many victims' families over a very, very long time. In fact, my own family had 2 family members killed, and many of my neighbours killed in the course or as a consequence of the conflict. So the point behind trying to deal with these issues is to try and bring those families to a better place in the place.
Okay, let me come back in there if that's okay. You mentioned there Michael Donegan, and obviously it's 41 years since his father, Sam, was killed by the IRA. They're looking for acknowledgement by the IRA that in fact their father was a victim of the IRA and an apology. Can you give that to the Donegan family now tonight?
Well, first of all, let's remember that the IRA have left the stage.
No, that's not what I asked.
No, I know it isn't what you asked, but you asked me for the IRA to acknowledge, could I get the IRA to acknowledge that they had killed Mr. Donegan, Garda Donegan. So I'm making the point. I don't know who killed Garda Donegan. It may have been Republicans, it may have been the IRA.
Well, the Historical Inquiries team, just to come back in there, have categorically said they believe it was the IRA, Gerry Adams.
Okay, but just, if you don't mind, Marion, let me just articulate a position. The IRA called the cessation almost 20 years ago. Now, it broke down shortly afterwards, but it left the stage almost 10 years ago. It famously put its arms beyond use. It stood down its structures. So if we want to find out, did the IRA kill this guard officer, or indeed prison officer Stack or the other guard officer, then we need to find some way of getting to the truth. That's what we need to do. And I think we've had 2 good examples recently of how that has been achieved. One was the Savile inquiry in Derry, which was put together in such a way as...
We know that. And what's the second one?
And the second one is the Smithwick's inquiry,
Fine.
which is investigating the killing of two RUC officers.
But tonight, as I said at the beginning, Gerry Adams, to be fair, tonight we are discussing the victims of Republican violence. You were a senior leader within the Republican movement. These three families, the Dunnigans, the Stacks. Let's take the case of Brian Stack, the prison officer, right? You heard his two sons there. They are looking for acknowledgement that the IRA shot their father in the back of the neck and an apology. Can you give that to them tonight?
Well, if the IRA killed any of these, or even if Republicans acting independently killed any of those people, of course I apologise for that, because I do recognise as a Republican leader I have a responsibility to try and keep moving this process on this island to a point where those who suffered as a consequence of the conflict can get closure. But let me just
wait one second.
Mariam,
No, but you see, can I just say, but they're
Mariam,
fine words.
Mariam,
But I'm saying to you, can you, all these years on, apologise? Because you almost sit there, like you knew nothing about anything that happened within the Republican family, and nobody really believes that. Can you give them an acknowledgement?
First of all, I would like you to be fair.
Yeah.
I know nothing about the killing of these three individuals. One of these killings happened 43 years ago. So let's be very, very clear. Let's look at the killing of Mr. Stack. Now, I'm meeting with his family, and I explained to his family in a letter to them that I mightn't be able to give them the answers. You know, they're asking Sinn Féin, please let me finish, Mariam.
Yeah,
they're asking Sinn Féin to acknowledge this man's killing. At that time in that prison, there were INLA prisoners, there were Republican prisoners. It was a very, very cruel regime. One Republican prisoner was killed during that period.
Let me come back in there for one moment.
No, sir, just please let me finish. Any individual Republican, or indeed criminals, are also criminal, ordinary, decent prisoners.
Fine.
There were also a plethora in the last 40 years of Republican organisations. The official IRA was active in this state in killings. The INLA was active in this state.
Okay, let me come back in there.
Sierra was active in this state.
I need to come back in there, to be fair, Gerry Adams. Two Sinn Féin colleagues of yours, Martin Ferris and Desi Ellis, were in Portlaoise when Brian Stack was there. So they would have some knowledge, and you're still colleagues and friends of theirs. And in his own autobiography, Martin Ferris spoke about Brian Stack being a very vindictive individual, which almost to the Stack family looked like he was in some way trying to justify his murder. Like, there's no way you couldn't have heard of Brian Stack's murder.
Of course I heard about his mother, but you're asking me, do I know who killed him? That's entirely different.
Did the IRA kill him?
I don't know.
Do you really not know?
No, I don't really know. And if I did, I would say to you, I'm not about, at this time in my life, and having come what I have come through, about standing here and setting pat answers back. I want to genuinely bring, if it's possible. Now, you know, the Good Friday Agreement is 15 years old this month, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Good Friday Agreement, and your friend John Hume and lots of us worked at that.
Yeah.
And a very, very crucial part of that Good Friday Agreement was that it dealt with the issue of prisoners. And a huge amount of...
What's that got to do with what we're talking about, with greatest respect?
Well, if you let me finish my point, then you might know. But if you keep interrupting me, nobody will know. Because a mark of our interviews over that number of decades has been perpetual interruptions when I'm trying to elaborate on a point. So, prisoners were released. Prisoners in both jurisdictions were released. Both governments agreed on that. And the people voted for it. A lot of those prisoners, because what had been developed was a democratic, peaceful way to achieve political objectives. So the rationale, the reason for any armed or violent actions was totally and absolutely removed. Now, at this time, we have a peaceful and democratic way to go forward, and we have a huge legacy of history.
Which is what I'm asking you about tonight.
Which I want to be part of, if I can, in my limited way, to be part of moving into a different
Which is
space.
great for the families to hear that.
Well, so I will meet, if they want me, and they might want to meet with me, but if the families want to meet with me, I will
Okay, well, we know
meet with
Brian
them.
Stack's... No, actually, Gerry, you see, I need to come back in there. Part of our history as well is you never let me back in to ask a question. In relation to Brian Stack, his family have written and they do want to meet you. Would you say they're even just talking to me there about the cruel regime in Portlaoise, which almost sounds, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but it almost sounds like you'd be justifying the killing of Brian.
I'm not justifying. I don't want to need to justify anybody's killing. Let me tell you something, Miriam. Tom Smith was killed in Portlaoise, a Republican prisoner. Hugh Hare was killed in County Clare. Eddie Fullerton, a colleague and close friend of mine, was killed in Buncrana. John Francis Green was killed. People were killed in Dublin and Monaghan. The Heavy Gang assaulted. Innocents went to prison. Now, let me just make another point.
Can I just say on that point, because I made it at the beginning, I don't deny that. I was here discussing the hunger strikers the other night and saying how sorry we felt for their families.
Miriam.
But tonight I'm discussing something.
Well, but you can't put words into my mouth. Let me give you another little example that you might find interesting. After the Town War and after the Civil War, please let me finish. There was no peace and reconciliation process even attempted. The shape of politics decided in the state was moulded by that. Now here we are, a very short time after a war has ended, trying to deal with this very, very
Okay, well let me go back to your Dole
issue.
apology. You did apologise. First of all, who were you apologising on behalf of?
Well, as I made it clear at the time, on behalf of Sinn Féin, on behalf of Republicans, and I had previously, and this was portrayed as my first apology. I had previously, on 2 occasions in the matter of public record, apologised for the killing of Gerry
Okay, but
McHugh.
who were you apologising to? For instance, those 3 families tonight, Gerry Adams, they're members of the state forces. Were you apologising to those 3 families?
Anyone who was killed as part of the state forces by the IRA or by Republicans is a matter of deep, deep regret for me. Now, any death, and all of us as human beings are shocked and outraged or annoyed or saddened by deaths. But in my case, as someone who defended the IRA during the war, as someone who remains a very, very strong Republican and so on and so forth, it's even worse if that organisation was about accidentally or deliberately.
Okay, let me come back in there, to be fair, Gerry Adams. More or less, when I asked you were those killings murders, you said yes. Were any of those 3 murders we spoke about there justified?
No.
Fine. In relation to another infamous murder, that of Tom Oliver in Louth, you know that case, do you?
I do, yes.
In Cooley, he was taken by the IRA, murdered horrendously. In fact, the local priest said it looked like concrete blocks had been dropped on every bone of his body.
Of course, that's to be condemned. If that's the case, that's to be condemned. Of course it is. I mean, I was actually in a very complete fluke. I was in holidays down in Galway and came back up and was in the Coolies at the time that Tom Oliver was killed. I was with my family in the Coolies at that time.
There is a strong belief, though, that in fact you were the Court of Appeal that said Tom Oliver should go to his death.
How can there is a strong belief. How can you come on this programme and say that, Miriam? Now, you're a journalist. Now, how can you come on that programme and say that?
Because in the same way, I suppose, that Garda commissioners, PSNI constables,
you're making the most...
But you can deny it.
Excuse me, but you should not be. You would not have the leader of the Labour Party, who was a very, very prominent member of the Workers' Party at the time, for example, when Seamus Costello. You wouldn't have Pat Robert in here and put that accusation to him.
But I'm entitled to put it to you by Tom.
You're not entitled to put it to me.
Well, you can deny it.
Well, I clearly deny it, but I do think that it's a very, very reprehensible accusation to make. I'm on this programme trying to make sense out of what was a conflict which marked this entire island, and also very grievously the number of thousands of people who were killed.
But I'm speaking to you about the actions of Republicans, and you're here as a leader of the Republicans, so I have to put those questions to you.
That's a different thing from accusing me of saying, what are your source?
In relation to
No, sorry, Miriam, you cannot just come on a programme and say it is widely believed, or it is believed that you were in a court of appeal.
Widely believed by members of his family?
Miriam.
Yes, that is the case, Gerry. Let's move to the disappeared, actually. Jean McConville, as you know, was the infamous case in 1972. 2 former colleagues of yours, including Brendan Hughes, who did say at one stage, Gerry, that he loved you, he felt so close to you. There are those great photos of you together in the maze. giving each other hugs. Both he and Dolores Price both said that you were responsible for Jean McColman's disappearance.
I've answered this accusation many times. Many, many times. They were telling lies.
Why would they lie?
Because they are people who, as they went on in their lives, became opponents, thought that I sold out, thought that I was a traitor, thought that I should be killed, are totally opposed to the peace process and allied themselves with various so-called dissident groups. Now, let me, if I may, first of all, none of those people who were killed and disappeared by the IRA, that should not have happened.
But why would Dolores Price have said it? Why would Dolores Price have said it, though?
Well, I've already told you why I think she would say it, but let me deal with this as an issue of trying to resolve a great injustice done. I went and talked to Father Alex Reid, and Father Alex Reid went and tried to put together a process of discovering these bodies, and he looked at the way, because the IRA had investigated and did an inquiry and named the number of people that it had killed and said that would try and help to recover their bodies. Now, Father Alex came back and he said to me, Gerry, this has been done wrong. This needs to be put together as if it was a cold case. This needs to be put together forensically. We need to bring in people who know about archaeology. We need to bring in... And we put together, the two of us, a plan which then went to the Irish government and the British government.
Okay.
And the commission was put forward, and the commission has recovered.
Okay, and I accept that.
And bear with me now, just. And a man called Nuffler, who is the chief forensics investigating person in all of this, said he got the fullest cooperation from IRA volunteers. The fullest copy. He said, I think I'm quoting him properly, that he got 100% cooperation. Now here is a great injustice.
You keep talking now, filibustering, and in fact I need to come back.
I'm making
I do need
point.
to come back in.
The point is, Republicans did something wrong, and Republicans could not have repaired that wrong, but they tried to give back to the family what the families deserved.
But, like, according to Dolores Price, Brennan Hughes, you were the commanding officer in Belfast in 1972. Are there any murders that you feel responsible for?
No. I clearly, as a Republican leader, will think back over all of the period, that words of mine, that actions of mine, that stances that I took, and I don't distance myself from the IRA. I've never distanced myself from the IRA, and until the day I die, I will not distance myself from the IRA.
Well, by saying you were never in it, of course, it does distance you from it.
But bear with me now, Miriam. See, the war is over. The war is over.
But for those families that Barry Commons spoke to, Gerry, it's not over for those families.
I understand that, but if those families feel in some way that I can help, I will meet with them. And maybe at the end of it, I won't be able to help, but I'm prepared to try to do it. Now, what Sinn Féin have been arguing for, and tell me, Miriam, who you know so much about these issues, why the two governments won't set up an arrangement whereby we invite in, under the aegis of an international agency, a truly independent international process to look at all of these matters. Why don't the governments do that? The smart remark from the Taoiseach came in response to a question from me, which was about children's benefit or some such issue. That's what that was about. I mean, how much investment has the Taoiseach in these matters?
Okay, can I just come back on that? I suppose for those three families that Barry Cummins spoke to, Gerry Adams, maybe they worry that I've sat here tonight, and with respect, you do act like you know absolutely nothing about even the murder of Brian Stack, and maybe that will worry them, that even if they meet you, or even if there was a peace and reconciliation forum, that the truth ultimately would not be told.
Well, those who were involved, and clearly someone killed these citizens, put together a process. It happened in Savile, it happened with Smithick, where in an unprecedented way, former IRA volunteers who were involved in operations in the South Armagh area came forward and gave evidence. Now, maybe the families won't get. I know, many families who will go to the grave without getting the type of closure that is required. An old
But you could help them.
Well, that's why am I on this programme? I mean, this isn't the most popular issue to be talking about on prime time.
But it matters a lot to them, and you apologise. So many people feel it does matter for Sinn Féin. Ultimately, if they wish to be in the government down here, that they actually do need to put some closure for the families that.
Well, again, if you don't mind me saying so, look at the shape of the current government and then ask the question about Seamus Costello, ask the question about Larry White, and I am not here as a person who is concerned about the fortunes of Sinn Féin. I'm here because I think I have a moral duty to try, as someone who went through the conflict, was lucky enough to survive, who was shot myself, by the way, and I tried to be killed a number of times. I want to be part of trying to sort all of this out, and never again will any person on the island of Ireland be bereaved as a result of political violence.
Fair enough. You are currently the leader of Sinn Féin, but you were also, according to many people, the commanding officer in West Belfast. It was a bloody conflict on both sides. People suffered on both sides. What are you honestly saying to me tonight? That there's no murder whatsoever, no death, no killing, that you feel in any way responsible for?
Well, I've already answered that question. I'm not going to keep repeating my answer.
But you were in the IRA.
Well, I've already answered that one many times. Now, let's look back at the history of the conflict. We probably don't have the time, and you would, of course, interrupt me. But I mean, look at all the people who politically turned their back on the North. Look at successive Dublin governments. Look at the role of British governments.
I accept all of that.
I accept full responsibility for anything that I did in all of my political life.
You're not denying your role in the IRA tonight.
I have already denied my role in the IRA. I don't want to keep repeating. But one of the issues you said earlier on was that you talked to me many times about, I think you said about the Dáil. You mostly only bring me on this programme to talk to me about the war, Miriam. The war is over.
That's actually untrue. We talk about the peace process a lot, Gerry Adams.
The war is over.
Except for those people
who are victims
and that's why
I'm here. And that's why I agreed to come on this programme. And that's why I have agreed, if the families want, to meet with them. And also, and most importantly, why Sinn Féin have invested so much time, because we live in communities which have suffered grievously. The video that you saw, that we both saw there, which is heartbreaking, could be repeated ad infinitum. I could take you through any street in West Belfast, and we can make a similar video. So all of those people deserve truth, and if I can help to bring truth, but I can't do it on terms which are not realistically based on what I know about these issues.
Let me ask you another. What about the forgotten people? I mentioned Tom Oliver, but even Eamon Collins, who actually sat in a primetime studio with me a few weeks before he was murdered by the IRA. Do you ever worry about people like that, or feel and think about them, or are they justifiable victims of the war?
Well. First of all, I mean, what happens in war is dreadful, and you've heard me saying this a million times. That we should not seek to glamorise war. War is horrific. Now, on the killing of human...
Was that murder? Was it murder? Was Eamon Collins
and
murder?
By definition, the killing of any human being by another human being is murder. Of course it is. But you see, these actions can be carried out by individuals.
But it's not all... Killings aren't always murder, to be honest. Like, I used to be a lawyer. Killings aren't always murder. What I'm saying is, I suppose the killing of Tom Oliver and Eamon Collins, informers as they were regarded, is that murder?
Well, I've already answered that question, I think. And, you know, will we get out our thesaurus? Will we go through all of this? Because what war does, it legitimatizes murder. That's what war does. And people support one side or the other side in whatever they happen to do. Now, you see, the big achievement of perhaps the last century and perhaps this century has been a peace process. And that peace process is probably the most successful peace process, but it's not perfect. And of course, there are all of these legacy issues. I can't get the government here to address these legacy issues. I want the government to address these legacy issues. I can't get the British government to address these legacy issues. Martin McGuinness is pressing the issue because we come from communities, and also because we are responsible political leaders, that we appreciate that those who were killed by the side we supported are deserving of our help.
As leader of Sinn Féin, you've been leader since Gareth Fitzgerald was Taoiseach. I mean, do you accept that for Sinn Féin perhaps to get into government here, Gerry Adams, you will have to cease being leader?
Well, the first thing we need, Miriam, with respect, is a mandate. The second thing we need is a programme for government. Whether I'm the leader or not is very second to all of that. And please, if you don't mind me saying so, we're in government in the north, and we have a lot of catching up to do in this state with what's going on in the north, because people who were fierce opponents and all of these unanswered questions, still yet resolved, have agreed to come together to work for the good of people.
So if any of those three families tonight at Barry Commonwealth want to meet you, you will meet them.
Let me finish. Don't please say something which somebody on the fringes of government will then use as a precondition. Sinn Féin has a mandate. That mandate was denied for decades, both in Section 31 terms and in other terms. Sinn Féin members and councillors were killed in the course of the conflict. So please respect those people. And if people give us a vote, and if we have a programme for government, we will be in government, not on any other basis, but that we deserve to be so because we have a mandate.
And we've been fine. Those three families speaking to Barry Commons, I feel a responsibility. They've spoken to us. If any of those wish to speak to you,
I've already made that clear. Don't feel responsible, Miriam, please. I've already said very, very clearly in my Ardèche speech, if you've been listening, that I was prepared to meet any families who wanted to meet with me.
Gerry Adams, thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Thanks, Miriam.
And that is it for tonight. Thanks very much from everyone here. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night.
Welcome, Gerry Adams.
Well, Dave, go to Mila Margaret, Declan agus Tommy, Hans Asta by Libsha, agus Shansa Horch, Declan Dumsa, a Kanch and Shaw, and Yuhui and Lower, Han, Simul agus Han, Tabak Shaw, or Waira, for Declan Kanch and Chuck Ogutsa. But damage, queer break that's a more Falsha or to Rowing. Agus and Barn also, Morris Augustin and Ambassador Foster. These islands, the island of Ireland and the island of Britain, have had a long, entangled, conflicted and tragic relationship. And because of our short centuries of occupation, of division, of conflict, of open war, nationalist and unionist and indeed many Irish people historically have defined themselves and our cultures and our aspiration in terms of our relationship with Britain. And because of our experience of colonisation and oppression, nationalists have largely rejected Britishness in its entirety, while unionists have embraced every British symbol and gesture. And consequently, many unionists distrust the entire nationalist population, and they fear that if our respective roles were reversed, we would imitate and repeat their excesses. In Belfast parlance, that the boot would be on the other foot. And there is a huge onus on Irish Republicans to address this. There's no point us talking about the fears that unionists have unless we, in a proactive way, listen to them articulate these concerns, and to do that in a genuine and meaningful way, and as Reverend Morris said, then to act on that, to go beyond the conversation, to make the conversation an action. Now, most people in England consider anyone who comes from this island as a Paddy or a Patricia, and the same is true of the USA and Canada and elsewhere, but it does come as a shock to many unionists when they travel to England. And of course, England itself has changed in recent decades, and in cities like London and Birmingham, there's now a cosmopolitan mix. And many citizens of these cities particularly would have little in common with what unionists describe as British culture. insofar as that is represented by blood and thunder, loyalist marching bands, and demands to walk through communities in which they are not welcome. But at the same time as this story and this narrative of colonisation and conflict, there has been a parallel process of many positive and shared experiences. Irish people have settled in Britain for generations. Irish artists have contributed enormously to English literature, to music and the arts. On the sports field, our people enjoy a robust and healthy rivalry. And in more recent years, Irish personalities have become popular and prominent in the British entertainment industry. So the relationships between Ireland and Britain, as well as those in the island of Ireland and between the people of Ireland itself, are currently in transition. Agus tá na cairú atá an idir ara agus Breataine agus na cairú idir phobal in Ireland fásta tá sé ag athrú. The peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, all the subsequent agreements have provided the basis for building an entirely new relationship based on partnership, based on equality and based on mutual respect. And all of us Irish and British governments, as well as Irish Republicans and Nationalists and Unionists, must pay and must play a full role in developing this process. But let us remember, it is a process. There will be ups and downs, but the direction is clear. Sinn Féin is committed to this process, to working with political representatives of unionism to fully implement the Good Friday Agreement. And these conversations, as outlined in this little book, I want to commend Declan for his leadership and his work in creating these initiatives. But it just opens up the pages of what is possible if people listen and talk to one another. During her historic visit here in 2011, Queen Elizabeth made clear her desire to be part of a process of reconciliation and healing. In the subsequent meeting between Martin McGuinness and Queen Elizabeth in Belfast and the state visit by President Michael D. Higgins to Britain were widely acknowledged, quite rightly, as groundbreaking. Last May, Senator Trevor O'Claherty, Martin McGuinness and I met with Prince Charles in Sligo. I have to commend Ambassador Chilcott. I went to him privately. I said to him, I think we should try to arrange for me to meet with Prince Charles. He immediately saw the importance of that, and I don't know what machinations or negotiations went on between then and us actually meeting, but he had the imagination and the wit and the wisdom to realise that this was an important initiative. We met in Mialtana, agus bhí Cora Edram, bhí Cora Cardwell, agus Suavnach on idir Misha, Far Féin, Martin agus Trevor. The conversation we had was cordial, it was relaxed, it was positive, despite the fact that we dealt with difficult issues. We acknowledge that Charles and his family had been hurt, that they suffered great loss at Mullaghmore by the actions of Irish Republicans. We spoke also of the hurt inflicted on our friends, on our neighbours, in our communities in Derry and Ballymurphy and Springhill, by the actions of the Parachute Regiment and other British Army regiments. He shared, and it was revealing for me, his own memories of the 1960s and of the conflict beginning. And it was obvious to me that he wanted to make a positive role in making conflict a thing of the past. Thankfully, no matter about the two awful, tragic killings in recent weeks, the conflict is over. Let there be no doubt about that. That some have the capacity to commit violent actions is one thing, but that the conflict is over is a matter of certainty. But the past is not another country. It does shape our lives, our politics, our present. And the sense of loss remains with families and with communities. And I'm mindful that this week, 2 of the disappeared were buried. And tomorrow in Cork, we reinter Thomas Kent, the remains of Thomas Kent, who was executed by the British in 1916. I also am very mindful that the ambassador's predecessor, Mr. Ewart Biggs, was killed by the IRA, by Republicans. And we clearly and obviously cannot undo this or these other events, but we can work, and we have a duty to work to ensure that they are never repeated. And we can work to reconcile ourselves to each other and to the past. We can build a future based on equality, based on respect, and based on inclusion. So the peace needs to be nurtured, it needs to be sustained, and it needs to be inclusive. And the resolve and responsibility of all leaders, not just political leaders, although they have a primary responsibility, but of all leaders, must be to ensure this, to ensure that no one else suffers as a result of conflict, that no other family is bereaved, that the experience of war and loss and injury is never repeated. Because Kailan sé go mé muid ag obair le héide. That means we have to work together. Bei gá le más agus féile ó ahan duine to ahan duine eile. Every person has to be able to show respect and tolerance to every other person. Now, the British government has a key role in encouraging and developing this process of healing and reconciliation, and it must act on this. Mr. Cameron's government is not doing this and has not done this. Victims and survivors of the conflict who are still seeking justice and truth must be given the strongest possible support and assistance, and whether they were bereaved by the IRA, by British state agencies, or through collusion with unions, paramilitaries, or by paramilitaries, the victims and their families and communities deserve justice. And that's an essential ingredient in the reconciliation process. I know only too well, from speaking directly to families of victims of the conflict, including victims of the IRA, that the past is part of their presence. I also know from talking and listening to these families that closure and healing is possible. I spoke recently to a family who had a brother killed, it's believed accidentally, in an IRA mine. And this happened in the mid-1970s. And they came 30, almost 40 years later, and they explained to me the effect this had on them growing up, the effect it had on their parents. They also had a sister who was seriously ill at this time and who actually died as a result of her illness. They also explained to her on at least one occasion, and perhaps 2 occasions, their home was taken over by the IRA, and that a British soldier was shot by a sniper who used one of their bedrooms. And I listened, and we were together for maybe an hour or an hour and a quarter, and we agreed to meet again, and we have met again. But the next time we met, they told me, because I met them in County Louth, that they drove in silence from the meeting until they stopped at Brucefield. And when they stopped at Brucefield, they had a great sense of liberation, almost joy, that they'd got someone to sit quietly and respectfully listen to their story. So closure is possible. That family are proponents, are supporters, are totally and absolutely behind the peace process. And for that reason, the measures that are involved in the Stormont House Agreement, which deals with the past, they must be implemented. And that will challenge Republicans. It will challenge the British government as well. But when we speak about reconciliation, it cannot be confined merely to a reconciliation between this state and the British state. What is required is a genuine process of reconciliation between the people of the island of Ireland and Britain, between North and South, and between the various traditions on the side. And this launch may be the most important of the launches you do, because it brings these issues, hopefully through the opinion makers here and the media who are here, into the parlance of people who live in this part of the island. And reconciliation must also go beyond the big houses. It must go beyond the palaces. It must be felt on the streets of Belfast and Derry and everywhere else. And forgiveness is also needed. I was arrested one time. I was arrested many times, but I was arrested one time and I was beaten stupid. At one point I was spread-eagled for hours and systematically beaten across the kidneys and the back and so on. And I actually collapsed and was unconscious on a number of occasions during that. And they actually at one point brought a doctor in, a military doctor, to check that I was fit enough to be beaten again. So I'm up at Stormont one day, and this little man came over to me, and we were in the lift. And he said to me, "I used to be a British soldier, and I battered you when you were arrested. And I'm sorry." And I said, "Do you promise not to do it again?" Now, I tell that story because that was good for me to be able to do that. If I had hung on to unforgiveness or hatred, that's bad for me. So forgiveness is necessary, not just for the perpetrator, it's also necessary for those who have been on the end of the injustice. And he went away happy, and I went away thinking I was a great guy. So it works. I know it's difficult, but it works. And reflect on this. If Martin McGuinness and Sinn Féin had not taken our recent initiatives, this is a profoundly important point. The people of the North, despite the presence of the President, would not have felt part of these historic developments. They weren't factored in. The people who we represent, the other people from the Unionist section, would not have been part of it. So that would have meant that people would have felt in those communities alienated from this state, as well as from the British state in Ireland. So any future initiatives must try to involve those communities in the North who have borne the brunt of the conflict. And that means, and should include, the consistent and non-threatening presence of Irish government ministers in all communities in the North, working to break down misunderstandings, to assist regenerational work, and to build working relationships. Very taken by a little moment in the process, and Martin Mansura will remember this, when there was a breakdown which really affected the representatives of the loyalist organisations. And things were very, very fraught. Who did they ask to meet with? They asked to meet with the Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern. They didn't ask to meet with the Secretary of State. They didn't ask to meet with the British government. They asked to meet with the Taoiseach. And that's another example of how some of these matters can be changed. So the government has to be in there, as I say, in a non-threatening way. It also has to deliver on enterprises of mutual benefit, the Norra Water Bridge, the A5 motorway, all the issues of cross-border cooperation which can help to make people's lives better. And peace and reconciliation has to be a tangible presence in communities which have borne the brunt of the conflict. Process is a work in progress. There are, as a number of speakers have noted serious and significant challenges facing the political institutions. But no one has been well served by the current machinations at Stormont. Let's remind ourselves of the pledge of office taken by ministers in the executive. That commits them to discharging their duties in good faith and to serve all the people equally and to act in accordance with general obligations on government to promote equality and prevent discrimination. The Code of Conduct demands that ministers operate in a way conducive to promoting good community relationships and equality of treatment. Now, how are these commitments honoured by resigning or standing aside from ministerial office one week, only to be reinstated the next week, and then to resign again, only to be reinstated, and then to explain that as creating the space for talks to happen, and then to absent themselves from those talks? So, we have tried to come at this in a very measured way, and I very much welcome Peter Robinson's indication yesterday that he will join the talks on Monday. And he knows that there's an urgent need for real talks to commence and solutions to be found, and we in Sinn Féin are certainly up for that. Building peace, developing reconciliation is not just a matter for people in the north, although we should be very mindful of our obligations and duties. But in the government here, in the opposition, and if I may say so, in the media, we need to deal with legacy issues in a way which takes all of us beyond invective. And there is a partitionist mindset here. We shouldn't shy away from this. In this state and in the policy-making sectors, in the government, in the permanent government, there's a thought process which is limited to 26 county terms. A recent, perhaps frivolous example of this was the Labour Minister, Aidan O'Riordan, tweeting his annoyance at the branding of a chicken product from Tyrone as Irish. He was protesting that this should be sold here. And so was Micheál Martin's call for the suspension of political institutions of the Good Friday Agreement and the Taoiseach's support for the move to adjourn the Assembly. So policy decisions in this state on the economy, on planning, on health, education, on infrastructure need to broaden out, need to have an all-Ireland context. I'll never be reconciled to the claim of an English government to have jurisdiction in my country. But I can be reconciled to unionism and unionists. I can be reconciled to loyalists. I can be reconciled to people who have a totally different view, and people who may have been hurt by the actions of Republicans, who may have hurt Republicans or the communities from which we spring. And I believe fundamentally in what Wolfe Tone termed a cordial union between all our people. And I also firmly contend that those of us who want a united Ireland have a duty to stretch out, a duty to reach out, a duty to go further than anyone else. We also need to recognise that the united Ireland which may emerge may not be the one traditionally envisaged. It must be pluralist, inclusive and accommodating, of course. But orange is one of our national colours. There will be orange parades in a united Ireland. And I would appeal directly to the Orange Order to play its part in the peace process, to follow the example of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles. And I remind people of the words of Britain's King George on the 7th of June 1921. He said, "May this historic gathering be the prelude of a day in which Irish people, north and south, under one parliament or two, as these parliaments themselves may decide, shall work together in common love for Ireland upon the sure foundations of mutual justice and respect." So we Republicans need to be open, we need to be imaginative, we need to be accommodating in our approach to all of these issues. We must be open to listening to unionism about what they believe are the virtues of the Union and what it offers to citizens. We need to look at what they mean by their sense of Britishness and be willing to explore and be open to new concepts. We need to look at ways in which the Unionist people can be comfortable, can be secure, ways in which they will have real ownership in a new Ireland. And we need to be able to consider transitional arrangements which may mean, or could mean, continued devolution to Belfast within an all-Ireland structure. And while much of the history of our two islands has been marked by sadness and tragedy, we now have a unique opportunity to be the authors of a new, peaceful, hopeful and exciting chapter. You see, the future has not yet been written. So all the people of this island and the governments of these islands can write this together. Sinn Féin is up for that challenge. I know that others within unions are up for that challenge as well. I know people within the British establishment are up for that challenge. So what we need to do is to deliver on the challenge. Gora míle mágah. Where my over the Cahillagus Tommy Fuyak as an Dash Lord Turn Aber Topic Talk Shaw Anocht, August La, August Iha, Fear Topic Talk, Shaw the Locked Task, August Currum, Balcha, Rivna, Grippian Shaw, Udini, and Gallery, and elsewhere in Leinster House, and extend solidarity to all travellers on this historic day. It's their day, and a momentous step forward for equality. And somewhere outside, and I'm sure we all regret that, and perhaps if the Taoiseach's schedule allows, he could address them. I understand there are 70 members of the travelling community over in Boswell's, and some of us could go and give them some sense of what has happened here this evening. And I want, on behalf of Sinn Féin, to very much welcome and to thank the Taoiseach for recognising traveller ethnicity this evening. And I want to pay tribute in particular to those who have advocated on behalf of the traveller community, from within the traveller community itself, but also from the settled community who have done so much to advance this cause. And some have done it for decades, and we are very thankful to them for that. We need also to be mindful of those who have suffered because they were travellers, and I particularly want to remember the Lynch, Connors and Gilbert families who died in Glenamuck. And I want to pay tribute to the women of the traveller community. Like their sisters in the disadvantaged sections of the settled community, the women of the traveller community have been the great heroines and the champions who have kept their families going through thick and thin. I also want to acknowledge the work of the Minister of State, David Stanton, Moihu, Ira, Stanton, Tamwich, Wiek, Ditsa, Basta. I commend the work of the Justice Committees, both in the last Dáil who adopted, chaired by Chuck Stanton, who adopted a report by Patrick McLaughlin, recommending the recognition of traveller ethnicity, and also the current committee chaired by Queebeen O'Quillan. And today's decision to recognise traveller ethnicity is the right thing to do. And the Taoiseach's statement finally brings the Irish state into lines with existing recognition in place in the north, as well as in England, Scotland and Wales. And the distinct culture, the traditions, the ethnicity of the traveller community need to be cherished and valued. One of the main characteristics of Irish travellers is their nomadic lifestyle. And this was particularly the case until the 1950s and the 1960s. Until then, many earned a living from repairing and making household utensils, which were usually made from tin. The rapid rate of new technologies, the use of plastic and other cheap goods brought about a major change in the travellers' lifestyles. But the Commission on Itinerancy, the report of 1963, also had a huge bearing on the lives of travellers in this state. The report established policy on travellers for the following 20 years. It's one of the most shameful reports in the history of this state. And if Choctaw want an insight into its agenda or views, they need to look at the terms of reference for the Commission. They were to inquire into the problem arising from the presence in the country of itinerants in considerable numbers, to examine the economic, educational, health and social problems inherent in their way of life, and to promote their absorption into the general community. And these terms were dripping in racism and elitism. They were ignorant, stupid and ill-informed. So it's little wonder, after decades of discrimination and demonisation, there is a sense of demoralisation, low self-worth and inferiority among some in the traveller community. The prejudice and discrimination many travellers face has worsened in recent years. We need look only to the opposition to a temporary halting site for those bereaved in the fire in late 2015 as an example, or the treatment of travellers in my own constituency who were evicted from a halting site in Dundalk this time last year. There's that sense of a much wider institutional discrimination faced by members of the travelling community in areas like health and education provision, and that's been a hallmark of relationships between settled people and travellers. And that relationship has been blighted by suspicion, resentment, animosity, based on false perceptions and fears. A lot of it based on ignorance. And ignorance breeds fear. And the only cure for ignorance is knowledge. And that comes from education and engagement. The proclamation of 1916 should be the mission statement of a modern Irish Republic. It addresses itself to Irish men and Irish women. It doesn't say, unless you're a member of the traveller community. All of us have rights. That includes the right to receive equal service in shops and pubs, the right to access education, health services, work, the right to accommodation on the basis of equality. And every Irish citizen should enjoy the rights and entitlements that comes with that citizenship. And regrettably, that has not been the case for our traveller brothers and sisters. The traveller child born today faces a life in which he or she will be part of the most socially disadvantaged group in Irish society. The child will leave school earlier, have little prospect of work, will suffer ill health and poverty, and will die younger. He or she will endure substandard living conditions. Many will have no access to basic facilities such as sanitation, water and electricity. They will face discrimination in employment, and most will never work. Cutbacks in education, health and other services have impacted severely on the traveller community. The suicide rate for traveller women is 6 times that of the settled community. It's 7 times higher for traveller men. And at the root of these problems are the unacceptable levels of prejudice, discrimination and social exclusion experienced by travellers at institutional and other levels. And that has to be combated. And it can be combated. Alongside tonight's recognition of traveller ethnicity, there needs to be a process established to improve relations between the settled and traveller communities. Sinn Féin have called in the past for the establishment of a national forum across the island of Ireland involving travellers and the settled community, including representatives of all political parties, of government, local authorities, health and education sectors, and representatives of media organisations to plan a way ahead. And I repeat that call this evening. Such a forum could discuss openly and in detail how discrimination and prejudice against travellers can be confronted, including prejudicial attitudes facilitated by the actions of some politicians and media outlets. Despite the decades of discrimination, the traveller community are a proud people. They are a resilient people. And I want to acknowledge in particular the huge contribution and influence on Irish traditional music by Irish traveller families, particularly Indian pipers and fiddlers. In their excellent book, Free Spirits, Tommy Fagan and Oliver O'Connell make the point that Ireland and Irish culture is richer because of the music and the song of the traveller community. They say, wherever Irish music is played, wherever Irish songs are sung, wherever Irish stories are told, and wherever Irish dances are performed, the influences of the Dorans, the Keenans, the Furies, the Duns, the Dohertys, and the great traveller and musical families will be very much in evidence. And can we add to that Maggie Barry and the Packer Dunn? And Christy Moore has consistently paid a tribute to John Riley, who kept alive songs like the Well Below the Valley, which have been sung for 200 years. That's the traveller community that I know. Creative, strong, resilient, generous. In the summer of '69, when sectarian evictions were incited in reaction in the North to the demands of the civil rights movement, I was one of a small group of activists who helped families to move their belongings from their homes. It should be noted that it was people from the traveller community in Belfast who provided and drove the lorries at great risk to themselves, which took these families out of danger. Among the travellers today, there's an articulate, grassroots leadership well able to voice traveller issues and who have consistently raised our community's awareness of their rights. Some of them are in the gallery, and I know that they're up for the challenge of ensuring that all of us together remove lingering issues, ensure our society embraces differences that make up the diversity and uniqueness of the people of our island. And through strong and resolute leadership like that which was shown tonight, and cooperation at all levels in political and civic society, and in our settled and traveller communities, we can ensure a society that underpins equality for every citizen. This is a major step in the right direction tonight. We need to keep moving in that direction. It's a hugely historic moment for the 40,000 members of our traveller community. It's an important symbolic acknowledgement, but it must also pave the way for real, practical change. Action must follow ethnicity. For Romina Margaret.
Deputy Joan Burton, your 10 minutes.
Ahan dana a dahru an imak shaw an you agus ahan dana a glock part on agus go and wehas lesh and looked is jackta boss. I want to thank the team who put together this conference and all of the participants, everybody who was on the panel or who participated from the audience, and thank you also for your engagement here today. Sinn Féin makes no secret of our desire for Irish unity, our belief in the sovereignty of the people of this island, and we want an end to partition, and we want the creation of a new Ireland, an agreed Ireland in which all citizens are equal before the law and under the law, and where their rights and entitlements are protected in law. And in our view, the right to the basics of life should include economic as well as political and social rights. The right to a home, a job, access to education, to universal health care, to a clean and safe environment. And gender, disability, race or class or skin colour or creed or the place where you live should not deny any citizen his or her full rights as human beings. And that vision of a new Ireland is rooted in the Republic that was envisaged by the leaders of 1916 and contained in the Proclamation. So that's the easy bit. That's the type of Ireland, the type of united Ireland we want to see. And of course, that's a matter to be decided democratically. We can't be naive or insensitive to the opposition of unionists to the concept, never mind the reality, of Irish unity. And the recent Assembly and the Westminster election results are evidence of the deep political schism that exists in the North around what is generally referred to as the constitutional issue. And we understand many unionists are committed to the union with Britain. And we realise also that that's not just a commitment, or we should realise that that's not just a commitment which rests solely on the perceived economic benefits of the union. I mean, imagine if an economist was able to put together a strong argument that the people of the North are economically better off within the Union. Would that make any United Ireland or any Republican less committed to the idea of a United Ireland, to the democratic goals and beliefs that we have? So of course not. So why would we expect the Unionists to be any different? And while the economic case for unity is important, and diffusing one argument used to object to Irish unity, and without doubt a single island economy make sense, it will not on its own win some unionists over to the possibility of supporting a united Ireland, even though, without doubt, some will be attracted by the economic benefits. So we need a new approach, one which unlocks unionist opposition to a new Ireland by reminding them of their historic place here and of the positive contribution they have made to society on this island. So instead of concentrating on the negative aspects of our 4 centuries of shared history, I suggest that we embrace the areas of agreement and of cooperation, of good neighbourliness and common good. Chucky ar a nua aontaithe ón a bhiontaras ar muintir an Ilion Shaw atá bunathe ar an co-promise. A truly united Ireland will emerge from the reconciliation of the people of this island based on equality. So the reality is that for 400 years of their presence on the island, Protestants, and especially Northern Protestants, have been woven into the narrative that contributes and constitutes the history of Ireland. And that narrative has been a troubled one, but there also have been positive dynamics in it. Mar sin tá star coitianta agin agus bei taiki coitianta agin basta. Our task must be to try and develop a dialogue that looks to a shared future which protects, cherishes and minds every citizen, and in which everyone, the crucial little issue for us to get our heads around, accepts the right of the other to be Irish or British or Unionist or Nationalist or Republican. So how do we, on the basis of equality, and this is crucial, this notion and principle of equality, how do we bring about a new Ireland that can agree to disagree on these issues, respect the other's allegiance and our different sense of identity? And that, I think, is crucial. It's especially so at this time. This is a time of great opportunity, of big challenges, of huge change. In fact, rarely have any of us lived through so much change in such a short space of time. In my view, that's going to be the imperative in the upcoming period for a peaceful transition to an agreed Ireland. That's going to be the imperative. In other words, increasingly, the need for the ongoing social and economic stability and security and prosperity for the whole island and all of its people is going to be a driver for our ideas of how to bring about Irish unity. The peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, have transformed the lives of every citizen on this island, especially in the north. But there's so much more needs to be done to end poverty, to end inequality, to reverse disadvantage, and to tackle sectarianism. And the Brexit referendum vote last year, the Assembly results in March, the Westminster election results this month, and the census conclusions from 2011 are evidence of a shifting demographic and political dynamic in Northern politics. Those who define themselves as British, and we're making it very clear that they have a place, have an ownership in a new Ireland as of right, while still defining themselves as British. For the first time, they are a minority here in this state. For the first time. The March Assembly election, the Westminster results, which saw Unionists lose their Assembly majority, become less than 50% of the vote, underpin this changing political demographics, and that's working away below the surface. So within a few short years, the potential for a vote to end partition and to unite Ireland is a real possibility. And I return to my earlier point. How do we create a new Ireland, and we quite deliberately used this title, an agreed future? How do we create this in the time ahead, which compromises all the narratives, all the cultures, all the different aspects of respects and takes and perceptions. How do we do that? So I think our narrative is the right narrative, but it's not the only narrative. And it's when we lay our narrative down beside all the other narratives that we get a complete sense of the history. That's how you do it. There has to be that acceptance across the board that everyone has to be included. We don't have to agree, we don't even have to like, but we have to ensure that we treat people the way we want to be treated ourselves. So the Irish government has a crucial role in this. The Dublin political parties, Irish society, North and South, need to address all of these issues. And let me assure Chris Donnelly, Sinn Féin, when we contest the next election in the South, will be contesting that election seeking a mandate to be in government. That's where we want to be. Whether we are or not, of course, depends on what mandate we may get and depends on the terms for our entry into government. Now, Irish governments face away from the North. They don't face towards the North. Donna from Derry, the singer, said during a debate on RTE, people from the North always look south. People from the South rarely look north. And I think that sort of encompasses almost 100 years of partitionism. So we need to get the Irish establishment to come away from its partitionist position and to look at all of these issues. And to look, of course, at the way unionists see the future, but also to look at the way those of us who are Irish citizens and who claim that Irish citizenship see the future as well. I don't like the term Northern nationalist, but nationalists living in this part of the island. I also don't believe that the homophobic, the sectarian, the narrow-minded views, the sexist views that are sometimes articulated by unionist leaders is in keeping with the best instincts of broader unionism. I just don't believe it. It obviously reflects, and they keep getting elected, but I don't believe it addresses the issues that are there and the attitude of what we call ordinary unionists on these matters. But they're the voices. So other voices have to emerge within unionism. Other voices have to speak up. Other voices have to speak out. And they need to be listened to. And hopefully, as part of that process, they too will be willing to explore what is meant by Irishness. And in my view, the notion of Irishness should be as inclusive and as broad a concept as possible. I think we also need to address, as we approach the marching season, the future role of the Orange Order, its place in an agreed Ireland. One of the DUP people reminded me yesterday that the Orange Order was an all-Ireland body, which was new light out of old windows. But there you go. Of course it's an all-Ireland body. But the notion of what role they should play is also a challenge to the Orange. And I once again want to invite their leaders to meet with the Sinn Féin party, to sit down and discuss these issues out, because it's totally unacceptable that the Orange would refuse to meet at leadership level with our leadership. And I've met with many Orange men, as have other Republicans, and these have been useful and they have been necessary engagements, and that needs to be built upon. There's also an issue that unionist leaders, or unionists generally, including very moderate people, find it difficult to take public as opposed to private reconciliation initiatives. There is no forum similar to this to which anyone from unionism brings together the type of opinions and views and would invite anybody from Sinn Féin to be in attendance at. It's not there. There's no equivalent of Féile and Phobal or any of the other democratic initiatives that are ongoing. So that needs to be addressed. And there is an unwillingness for unionists to publicly reciprocate to goodwill from Republicans. And, you know, Martin McGuinness's resignation letter, in which he noted his concern about this, should give thoughtful leaders of unionism some encouragement if they genuinely want to build a future based on mutual respect. And perhaps they should also tell us if reconciliation means the same thing to them as it does to the rest of us. So, as I close my remarks, let me remind everyone, as Michelle O'Neill made clear earlier, the objective of uniting Ireland, of uniting the people of Ireland, is not the property of any one grouping or party. Agus the Sinn Féin a Gerry an Rialtas agus Party Ella a spragu con coiste dala a vonu or into Naharan. We're trying at this point, and Pierce Doherty's leading us in this endeavour, to encourage the government in Dublin and others in the Oireachtas to establish a Dáil committee on Irish unity. And this Oireachtas committee could bring forward proposals of what United Ireland might look like, about how you would get and win a referendum on Irish unity, of how the Irish state needs to plan for reunification across all areas of the economy and society. And we're also working on a follow-up paper to our recently published Towards a United Ireland discussion paper that was launched in November. So I would ask everyone, as others have done, who's interested in a United Ireland, or indeed who are not interested in a United Ireland, to join this conversation, to organise your own get-togethers, your own conferences, your own forums, to publish your proposals for and against, and to let everyone hear your views, because the days of leaving the debate about a United Ireland for another time, that's over. The debate's on. The debate's ongoing. The changes, the demographic, political, social and economic changes are happening as we speak. So I think we have a huge opportunity to build a new Ireland which values all of its citizens, all of its communities, old and new. I think we have an opportunity to build a society that will open the door of education to everyone, provide homes for everyone, create a health service for everyone, that we can actually lay to rest the violent ghosts of our past and end any possibility of their re-emergence. So we need to work together and continue saying provocative things and making each other think. And for my part, I want to work with that complex array of people who describe themselves as believers, whether they're subscribers or non-subscribers, covenanters, succeeders, Baptists, Congregationalists, or members of many of the independent congregations that constitute the Protestant community in Ireland today. And my appeal at the end of a very successful conference is for all of us, in respect and tolerance, to enter into that dialogue about the future. So thank you all for your attendance here today, for your contribution. Thanks again to Matt and Rachel and their team for putting this together, to the people who chaired the proceedings, and to all of the people who contributed, and to the panels. Tam which we are break, Deepsha, Guller. We're a mile magaf.
Agus ní léon dá dúine atá ag freastal ar daisna ar feig na mblianta. This has to be the most emotionally charged Ardèche we have attended. And it's not just because of the constant reminder of our great loss earlier this year, with the absence of a much-loved face on the podium behind me, but it's also due to our mixed emotions about what our next speaker might be about to say. Giving leadership in any circumstance is difficult and challenging, but for Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, giving leadership during a time of unprecedented civil upheaval and bitter conflict was even more so. And indeed, it was dangerous for them as they mapped a difficult path to bring our small nation from conflict to peace. Agus cé go bhfuil méid olmhór déanta aige Hanahain, Despite the sacrifices he, Colette and Garrod have made on our behalf to bring us to this, the strongest point in our history, we selfishly still want more. Being lucky enough to grow up in the Republican family, as an awful lot of us here tonight have done, there are many inspirational figures for us to try and emulate. I've often have spoken of heroes in my own life, such as Rita O'Hare and Anne O'Sullivan. But if I'm being honest, I've been holding out. As a child, I actually thought there was nobody like Gerry Adams. But then I grew up. Now, as an adult, I know that there isn't anyone like Gerry Adams. There isn't an icon of freedom struggle across the world who 40 years later still attracts huge crowds just to come and hear his words in every corner of this globe, and who, at 69 years of age, could cause excitement amongst my young adult students, and you did, when he joined Snapchat this week. And tonight, if you let me speak for you in front of all of our welcome and national guests and those watching us at home, I say on your behalf, and no other political leader in this country will have their membership united in saying that we absolutely admire and respect, but above all, we love this great giant on whose shoulders we stand, and no matter what he tells us tonight, he will always, always be our leader.
J.D. Bacarja agus Tafalcha Rove Aleg Hig Arda Sinn Féin. A special Ced Mita Falcha to Friends of Sinn Féin USA and representatives of the North American Labour Movement. And best wishes to the President of the Friends of Sinn Féin USA, Jim Cullen, who is seriously ill. Falcha also to Friends of Sinn Féin in Canada, and welcomes to our comrades from Cuba, Greece, Britain, from the Basque Country, from GUI NGL, and to all our foreign signatories and diplomats. Aslan Awalya to the Cuban ambassador Hermes and his band Kelia Anna. Love and solidarity greetings to the people of Palestine and the Gaza Strip, and solidarity also to the people of Catalonia. Tá Mahoj Kancha Anachtar Son Makara, August Macomradi, August our Gunara, Martin McGuinness, August the Bernie, August the Clan, Atal Lynn, and Shaw. We miss Martin. We miss all those comrades who died in the last year and in the decades of conflict. Spragan Shade and Wedge Goji and last Shaw, Lena Eisling. I was first elected Uachtaráin Sinn Féin in 1983. The war in the north was raging, and the hunger strikes 2 years before, and the deaths of Bobby Sands, they had dramatically altered the political landscape. Bobby's election In Fermanagh South Tyrone, Kieran Docks and Kevin Monaghan, Paddy Agnew and Louth, and the anti-H Block Armagh candidates elsewhere brought us into a new phase of struggle. Republicans had been at the heart of a culture of resistance, correctly, and I stress this, correctly standing strong against the brutality of the British state. Our leadership set about transforming that culture into a culture of change. In my first Ardèche speech as Uachtaráin, I said we needed an all-Ireland struggle. I warned against Sinn Féin activists standing on the sidelines, separate from and isolated from the people. And that imperative holds true today. I told that Ardèche that Sinn Féin's policies are not just some pleasant aims for some future hope for United Ireland, but are tough, practical policies that can give leadership and provide results. I reiterated our goals, the unity of the people and the end of partition. It's hard to say, reiterate when you're stuck up here. This had to, I said, and has to include our unionist neighbours, who have every right to a full and equal involvement in shaping the future of this island. And I contended then, as I do today, that the economy should serve the people, not the other way round. That struggle for equality and fairness continues. And Sinn Féin, your party, are now in the leadership of that battle. 20 years ago, Cuibhín Ó Cuailleáin was our sole teach de dála. Farmoy, Cuibhín agus Taban Úntach Bridge. Now we have 23 TDs, 7 Shoutout, 4 MEPs representing all parts of this island, 27 MLAs, 7 MPs, and over 250 councillors. And today, over 500,000 people vote for Sinn Féin. Furthermore, the perpetual unionist majority built into the gerrymandered northern state is gone. Agus Baboil Yum, Shib a leg a Hraslu as Kudju Kunshaw of Wintamach. And if I was asked by anybody, how do we measure Sinn Féin? I would say, judge us on the changes we bring about. That's what Sinn Féin is. The Republican Party for positive change and equality for the people. Who here remembers Margaret Thatcher? For many of my generation, she will be forever linked with the hunger strikes. But she's more than that. Her right-wing Conservative government increased poverty and destroyed lives. Thatcherism was for tax breaks, for big business and the elites. Thatcher was against workers' rights and against public services. Do you recognise the similarities? Thatcher is gone. Thatcher is gone, but her legacy lives on in our Taoiseach. His republic, limited to 26 counties, extends only to those who get up early in the morning to go to the gym, on the way to a highly paid job with big expenses and gold-plated pensions. Well, good luck to them. But Sinn Féin makes no apologies for also standing with those who get up early to commute into cities where they cannot afford to live. We stand with those who get up early to drop their children to school, or the childminder if they can get childcare. We stand with those who care for sick friends, for neighbours or family. We stand with those living in rural Ireland without proper services and opportunities. We stand with those unable to work. We stand with citizens who work long hours for low pay or who struggle to pay health costs. Taoiseach Varadkar's Republic of Opportunity is a Sinn Féin Republic, a contradiction. And how can Micheál Martin say he is for an Ireland for all when he's propping up a government for the few? This conservative Sinn Féinism is a million miles away from the vision of the 1916 proclamation. A genuine republic would not allow over 3,000 children to be homeless. It would not allow patients, many of them elderly, some of them vulnerable children, to be left lying on hospital trolleys, or 600,000 people on growing hospital waiting lists. A genuine republic would support citizens with intellectual or physical disabilities and their families. A genuine republic would not tolerate disadvantage and inequality or corruption and scandals. Sinn Féin has a different set of core values from the elites who run this island. We believe in rights. We believe in freedom. We believe in equality. We believe in solidarity. Sinn Féin believes that society must be shaped so that all citizens can achieve their full potential. That includes citizens in rural Ireland, and we make no apologies for standing up for public services, including a genuine health service across this island. We believe in everyone's right to a home. We also want to extend the vote in presidential elections to the north and the diaspora. And Sinn Féin fully supports the repeal of the 8th Amendment. Women and their doctors need legal protection. Women deserve, are entitled to be trusted and respected. That's the Sinn Féin message. Brexit is the single greatest threat to Irish people for generations, and that's why we opposed the referendum and why we've consistently called for special status for the North within the European Union. Of course, we're critical of the European Union, but I want to commend our spokespersons on this issue, and especially our team of MEPs who, unlike the Irish government, have shown real leadership. The government has only recently wakened up to the reality that Brexit on British government terms is not acceptable. It will be disastrous for Irish business and farming in every single part of this island. It will destroy the rights of citizens in the north. It is not compatible with the Good Friday Agreement. Leo Varadkar needs to stand up for the interests of all the people of this island. He has a veto. Leo should use the veto. He needs to be more like Michael Collins and less like Hugh Grant. The executive collapsed 10 months ago when Martin McGuinness resigned following allegations from within the DUP of corruption by the DUP. Since March, led by Michelle O'Neill, Sinn Féin has been working hard to restore the political institutions. We want to deliver for everyone in the North on the basis of respect, tolerance and equality. And the denial of these modest rights would not be tolerated in Dublin or London, and they will not be tolerated in the 6 counties in the north of this island. DUP's opposition to these basic rights means there is no executive. And the British government has been complicit in this. Through her pact with the DUP, Theresa May has prioritised her own political survival. So we met with the Taoiseach this week, and we'll meet with the British Prime Minister next week. And we told the Taoiseach that it's now time for the governments to act. If the executive is to be re-established, the role of the Irish government will be decisive. It can be neither neutral or neutered on this matter. These issues aren't going away, and the only way forward is through honouring agreements, not breaking them. No British government has any right to any involvement in Irish affairs. That's our credo. But until the British government leaves our country, the least they can do is to deliver on their obligations, and the least an Irish government can do is to insist on this. Those of us who want a united Ireland must articulate that clearly and in the context of the Good Friday Agreement. And we have to persuade our unionist neighbours to support a new and agreed Ireland in which orange and green can live together in prosperity and harmony. We have so much in common. We have to ensure that everyone's rights are underpinned, and an agreed Ireland has to guarantee unionists their rights. The future is for the people to decide peacefully and democratically. Several months ago, I wrote to the leaders of the political parties and the independents in the Oireachtas, proposing the establishment of an all-party committee on Irish unity. The Fianna Fáil leader has rejected this, so too has the Taoiseach. Why? Isn't it telling that the leader of Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, and the leader of Fine Gael, the United Ireland Party, are preventing the Oireachtas from discussing the future of this island? So what will Sinn Féin do? Sinn Féin will bring forward a white paper on Irish unity. Sinn Féin will make the aim of a new agreed Ireland the primary focus of any government that we're part of. Sinn Féin will campaign for a referendum on unity to be held and to be won in the next 5 years. So don't let Leo and don't let Micheál tell you that this is not right or this is not achievable. It is achievable, and it will be achieved with or without them. Sinn Féin will be in government in the north if and when there is agreement. We need to prepare also for being in government on Republican terms in Dublin. Go Kinshasa, Brahe and Shaw are in Meds, Chakti Dala, and Topa Ugging. The Fine Gael, the Fianna Fáil, the leaderships of the Dublin establishment, including the Independent Media Group, they don't want Sinn Féin in government because they and their cronies have run this state for nearly 100 years in their own interests. They know we will bring an end to corruption, an end to cronyism, and an end to Gumbinism. They know that a Sinn Féin-led government will mind people. If someone is in trouble, it will help them. If someone has fallen down, it will pick them up. Matadini on gan tinton, may fossil on dove. That's the sort of government that is needed, a government of equality, decency and fairness. Now, my friends, I'm very proud to have served Sinn Féin as Uachtaráin since 1983. Of course, before my time, before our time, there were other leaders who kept the flame alive. It was Tamwich, Wake, Dave Foster. And we're also very conscious that 20 of our members were murdered during the conflict. We're indebted to them and to their families. Last year, Martin McGuinness and I said there was a plan for change in the party leadership as part of the process of regeneration and renewal. I thought we needed to come here to tell you, not to tell the media, but to tell you, our comrades. 10 years after entering government with Ian Paisley, Martin's intention was to step down as Deputy First Minister on May the 8th. And then life punched us in the face. Martin's illness, the Cashmere Ice scandal, brought that date forward. Martin was a leading member of our leadership team. I've been enormously privileged to be part of an amazing and evolving collective leadership. It has included, in times past and hard and oppressive times and in different phases at national level, men and women like Maura Drum, John Joe McGurr, Joe Cahill, Rita O'Hare, Lucilita Brannock, Mitchell McLaughlin, Donny Morris and Pat Doherty, Martin himself, Tom Hartley, Queven O'Quillo and Jim Gibney, Ted, Desi, Dawn, Sheena Campbell, Sean McManus, Martin Ferris, and many, many, many more. Some of them remain active today, along with many others too, many for me to acknowledge. And if you're not mentioned in that list, please don't take the needle. Everybody's contribution is important. Everybody's contribution is valued. I'm looking back on a history that has passed. But may I say, I'm delighted to see so many of these comrades here, especially Councillor Joe Riley. Come on, Joe. Many comrades have given their entire lives to our struggle. They saw beyond the hardship of the moment and they embraced hope. And that resilience, like the peace process, is opposed by those who uphold the status quo. But despite them, we have prevailed. One of our greatest achievements has been, with John Hume and others, to build a peace process. We've also recast Sinn Féin into an effective all-Ireland Republican Party with clear policy and political objectives and the means to achieve them through democratic and peaceful forms of struggle where none existed before. Republicanism has never been stronger. This is our time. We will grow even stronger in the future, but leadership means knowing when it's time for change. And that time is now. I will not be standing for the Dáil in the next election, neither will my friend and comrade Martin Ferris. And I want to thank Martin, Marie and our clan for years of service to the Republic. This is also my last Ardèche. Also my last Ardèche. This is the important bit. This is also my last Ardèche as Uachtaráin Sinn Féin. I will be asking the incoming Ard Comhairle to agree a date in 2018 for a special Ardèche to elect our next Uachtaráin. I have always seen myself as a team player, as a team builder. I have complete confidence in the leaders we have elected this weekend and in the next generation of leaders. And I want to thank everyone who has welcomed me into their homes and communities and have made me part of countless campaigns, countless elections and countless negotiations. And I want to especially thank the people of West Belfast and the people of Louth, including Richard McCauley, for your unswerving support and solidarity. I firmly believe that one person can make a difference. And the first step in making a difference is believing that you can be that person. One woman, one man doing their best. That's what it takes. You don't have to do as much as Martin McGuinness did, but we all have to do our best, and we have to do it together. That's been the key of our successes so far, doing our best, moving forward, united, strong, and together. So now, Hopperay, Johnny, you are important. You are the nation builders. You are the makers of the future. Finally, my thanks to Colette. I've been very lucky. We are now married 47 years. There have been ups and downs. The prison ship Maidstone, Belfast Prison, Long Cash, the Hiss Blocks, and years of life on the run. But love has prevailed over everything life has thrown at us. We have been blessed with Geroid, the best son anyone could wish for, and Roisin, the best daughter-in-law, and with them came Drithla and Lishna and Dana and Rudin. The Gar Paisty is far as the going. Agus is McGrath Shiv Ali. So I would like my friend Martin Burris to come up here with me. I'm feeling lonely. Meet up with us. We're going to continue to go forward and Public the Boo, Nani Midge Arai, Lahelia Akarja. Meet up with us.
Grania will agus
Nileen. Martin McGuinness's granddaughter, Cara, is now going to sing Around the Vein. Gotcha and Shaw, Cara. Shin. Michael York, Cara. Be it a hassle. Shassel.
Sinn Féin, Goananus Carta agus Aontas na HÉireann, Equality, Rights and Irish Unity.
Now then, few political lives divide opinion like Gerry Adams. For some, he's a man of blood who defended many IRA atrocities during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. To others, he's a courageous peacemaker who was instrumental in the Good Friday Agreement 20 years ago. After 35 years as president of Sinn Féin, Mr. Adams is standing down this month and handing over to a new generation of Republican leaders. I sat down with him last week in Dundalk, near the Irish border, to reflect on his life campaigning for a united Ireland. I began by asking him whether he had failed in that endeavour.
No, because when I joined Sinn Féin, which was over 50 years ago, it was banned, it was outlawed. There was no prospect, really, of a strategy for Irish unity. If I look back now, 500,000 people vote for Sinn Féin. We're the second largest party in the north. There's now a peaceful way to get Irish unity.
Your old comrade Martin McGuinness never saw it. Do you think you'll see it?
Yes, if I live long enough, and you know what Martin's passing, I suppose, proves to all of us that you can't be certain about anything. You know, Martin, I miss Martin every single day. So, as an Irish Republic, is Irish unity inevitable? No, it isn't. It's only going to happen if we work at it. I come from a very, very straightforward position. I want to see an end to the British connection with Ireland.
How much does the Brexit vote help your ideal of a united Ireland?
I think we need to be very, very careful that we don't see Brexit as something which can be exploited. Brexit is disastrous for the people of Ireland. The British government are not at all clear about what their future relationship with the European Union is going to be, and they are arguing that they're going to leave the customs union and they are going to leave the single market. And that will end up a complete disaster for people here on the island of Ireland. The agreement that was made recently, which moved the negotiations into their second phase, was a fudge. It's filled with contradictions. The
fudge is not always bad.
Well, it is not always bad if it gets you over a particular difficulty. Tons of business people are totally dependent on the flow back and forth of business and commerce across what is an invisible border. When a hard economic border comes back, that's going to stunt that, it's going to destroy that.
If it comes back, one of your own MPs, Mr. Hazard, has said that if it comes back, those customs posts and those hard pieces of infrastructure along the border could become a target for dissident Republican groups and mass civil disobedience, and we could see the return of violence around the border. Do you share that worry?
Yes, I would. He didn't say it was likely. He said it was a concern, and that one has to be concerned that this would be exploited. But look, you see, people have got used after decades of conflict. People have got used to peace. So the images which you may have or which I may have of border checkpoints and of heavy patrols and
they belong to history.
That all belongs to history. And nobody wants that back.
Now, these debates are going to be thrashed out on the floor of the House of Commons, and there are going to be some very substantial votes. If Sinn Féin took up its seats and even voted once or twice, you could change the course of British history and change the course of history for the whole island of Ireland. Is it really worth Republican principle not taking those seats and not engaging in those votes?
Well, before I deal with that, let me tell you the solution to this problem. The solution to this problem is special designated status for the North within the European Union, and that is doable.
But the Irish government don't like this idea, and nor do they like it in Brussels. They think it sets too many precedents for the rest of the EU.
Well, I don't know whether they like it or not, because they're very flexible in terms of how they deal with the European Union and its relationships with the various different states, and with political will. That is very, very, very doable. Now, coming back to the issue of Sinn Féin taking our seats at Westminster, we just received the largest vote that we ever received.
And you have leverage.
No, sorry, Andrew. We, when we get a mandate, obey that mandate and stay true to that mandate. What that vote was a vote for no British involvement in our affairs. The centre of political gravity being on the island of Ireland. So we will not betray those people who had a choice.
Let's talk, if we may now, about the past. Why did you not join the IRA?
Because I was active in Sinn Féin when the IRA was just non-existent. In the 1960s, after the border campaign, the whole trajectory within republicanism was to build politically. And I'm one of the very small group of people who were activists before the pogroms in 1969. I'm one of the very few Republicans in there. Now, having said that, and you know, it's a matter of history. The IRA is gone, Andrew. The IRA is gone. And I mean, my position has been consistent that I was not a member of the IRA, but I've never distanced myself from the IRA.
So were you never tempted to join?
No, I wasn't. I have my role in the struggle. I like to think I've served the struggle well.
You always supported the armed struggle. You always defended the IRA. You were treated by members of the IRA as a kind of commander when you were in Long Kesh. And everybody who studied you, I mean, I range from British politicians to journalists, they all think you were in the IRA. You always say, no, I wasn't, and I wasn't on the Army Council. Why is it that everybody else, including the people who left their testimony in Boston and so forth, are sure that you were?
You'd have to ask them that, Andrew, and, you know, someday I'll do an interview on this issue won't arise. Now, I don't mind dealing with the issue, but I make the point again. See, the IRA have gone. I did defend the IRA, but I also was very critical of the IRA at times. I don't condone everything that the IRA did.
So you were very, very vociferous and very clear in condemning the Manchester arena bombing by an Islamic group. What is the moral difference between that, for instance, and the Birmingham pub bombs?
Well, Birmingham pub bombs were wrong. I condemn that as well. I don't have any compunction about it.
But those were innocent people going in just to have a pint of mild and listen to a jukebox.
But I'll give you my answer to that. I mean, I would wish that no one had been killed or injured in the course of the conflict.
At some point, you changed your mind about the physical force process and about the use of violence. When and why did you change your mind?
Because we were able to create an alternative. When you can put forward an alternative, sensible people will embrace that alternative, because no one wants to be either supporting or no one sensible wants to be supporting or part of armed action. So once you can present an alternative, it's when you close down the options, when you say to people...
So it was tactical rather than moral. It wasn't you saying this is morally wrong. Killing people like this is the wrong thing to do morally. Well, it no longer works, is what you were saying, in a sense.
No, I'm sorry, Andrew, I'm better able to tell you what I think on these matters than you to put words into my mouth. If we want to talk about morality, you need a longer show than this. But look, you can only make moral judgments about people when you walk in their shoes. And that's thankfully, we're talking here about history. We're talking about something that is past.
So there was not a moment when you looked at whether it was the death of Tim Parry or it was some kid or whatever, and you thought, this has gone far enough, I can no longer stick with this.
And I said that
there was
at the
a moral
time.
revulsion.
And I said that at the time. Sure, how could anyone, even if it's accidental, how could anyone stand over the killing of a child or stand over the killing of a civilian? What's different? Matter entirely, if you want to be into all of that, if it's soldiers versus soldiers. But in the awfulness and the horror of war, you cannot stand over some of those incidents.
You spent a lot of time sitting on the other side of the table from a whole stream of British leaders. Very, very early days, Ted Heath and Willie Whitelaw and so forth, and then John Major, Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson, Mo Mowlam. Which of those did most for peace in Ireland, in your view?
Well, I suppose Tony Blair, and I would have big issues with him around Iraq and other matters, and we actually, myself and Martin, warned him about not getting involved in Iraq.
Did you?
Oh yes, we said to him, don't look at the Irish experience, don't go in there. But he was given an opportunity, if you like, on a plate, and he seized it.
So Tony Blair, and now Tony Blair's party is led by a very, very different man who's always supported a united Ireland. He's been a big backer of yours over the years. What difference would it make to the island of Ireland and to Sinn Féin and your cause to have Jeremy Corbyn as British Prime Minister, which he might well be?
Well, I would like to see Jeremy in that position for the benefit of people in Britain, leaving Ireland out of it. I think Jeremy is an outstanding politician, and
let's put Ireland back into it.
I hope my endorsement of him isn't used against him in the time ahead. But yes, he and Ken Livingstone and others kept faith, and they were the people who said, when others said no, talk. They were the people who were open to conversation about how to deal with conflict and how to get conflict resolution processes. But look, let's not preempt the next
of course not.
General election.
Gerry Adams, are you a man of faith?
Yes, I am, yes.
So one day you will be judged by your maker. And when you're being judged by your maker, will you be able to say, I have clean hands?
Well, the one thing that I understand about faith, and as you get older you reflect on all of these things, the one thing I know about Jesus is that he forgave. He didn't go around condemning. Treat people with dignity and people will respond in a dignified way. Treat people badly and people will respond badly.
Nobody gets to write their own obituary, but what would be the headline on yours?
Oh, God knows. I'm not really interested. Some people say to me, what's your legacy? I won't be around.
No, none of us will. Gerry Adams, thank you very much for talking to us.
I want to thank Geraldine and John and Michael and Catherine and the entire Finucane family for the invitation to get the annual Pat Finucane lecture. And I'm humbled and honoured to have the opportunity to remember the work, the courage and the leadership of Pat Finucane, a dedicated human rights lawyer. And while the focus of my remarks will be on Pat's work, we will also honour Pat the person, the Falls Road man, the son, the father, the brother and the husband, the quirky, clever, good-natured friend and family member. Tuesday is the 30th anniversary of Pat's death at the hands of a British state-sponsored death squad. He was just 39 when he was murdered. Next month, March the 21st, would have been Pat's 70th birthday. And as a human rights lawyer, it didn't matter to Pat whether you were a Republican, a Unionist, a Loyalist, or none of these. If you were arrested, you have rights, and Pat's responsibility, his vocation, his mission in life was to vindicate and defend these rights. Pat believed that the law should uphold and protect the rights of citizens. But he was not naive. He understood the difference between the theory
and to practice in the application of human rights. That was part of his experience, part of his family's experience growing up in a sectarian orange state which didn't want them, and which denied them and hundreds of thousands of others their right to fair employment and decent housing. Pat grew up the eldest of a family of 8 in a working-class nationalist clan in West Belfast. He and I went to the same school, Sinn Féin's or Bohernawall on the Falls Road, agus Scoilwire, Fosta and St Mary's as well. I was a year ahead of him. As a student in the late 60s and early 70s, Pat was inspired by the civil rights struggle. The Battle of the Bogside, the brutal response of the RUC and the British states, and the devastation caused by the pogroms of August 69 were also hugely influential on him. Be a Howlock in a Honey destroyed Percy, Eganam Shin. The Finucane family lived in Percy Street, just across from St Comgall School on the Falls Road at that time. They were one of the hundreds of families in Belfast forced from their homes in August 1969. And from all these experiences grew a determination in Pat to challenge these injustices. That meant being the best human rights lawyer he could be. He graduated from Trinity College in Dublin and set up practice in Belfast. It was in Trinity that he and Geraldine met. He went on to be one of several lawyers who regularly worked with the Association of Legal Justice. The Association of Legal Justice was a voluntary organisation. It was established in 1970 to help the families of citizens being arrested every day by the RUC and the British Army. With little money and not a lot of legal expertise, Clara Riley, who's here today, Falshaw Road. Clara. The late Leo Wilson, Anne Murray, Francis Murray, Father Brian Brady, and others worked day and night to provide support to desperate families. They were up against a British system that was constantly changing the rules of arrest, of interrogation, and detention to suit their own political agenda. Getting information from British Army bases, from RUC barracks, about citizens detained was no easy task. Without the support and the assistance of Pat and other lawyers, the work of the ALJ would have been immeasurably more difficult. And looking back on it, these human rights defenders deserve our commendation and our thanks agus tamwich a lig buick deebsha gulyar. The Finucane family endured much during this period. Pat's brother John, an IRA volunteer, was killed in a car accident in 1972. Another brother, Dermot, was imprisoned, and after escaping from Long Kesh in 1983, he fought a successful extradition case. Seamus was interned at the age of 16 in 1973 also. He was later imprisoned in 1976 after being arrested with Bobby Sands. The Aitniamoy Ugamsa, or Wahar Pat, Upper She Lynn at Tehan and Milfirst to hear Ira na Blinta. I knew Pat's mother, Kathleen. Kathleen was a strong woman, widely liked and respected, good-humoured and resilient. Her husband died after the family home in Lenadoon was raided in September 1978. And the more I reflect on those days, the more I am in awe of the women in our struggle. From all sides, all our mothers, my own mother, Pat's mother, Geraldine, the mother of John, Michael and Catherine. What they put up with while rearing their families is heroic. And sometimes we take our mummies for granted. As MacParish wrote, Lord, you art hard on mothers. We suffer in their coming and their going. Kathleen Finucane was such a mother. And on her hard time, as we have heard from John, Geraldine also has become an outstanding mother on her own and a heroic woman who deserves our gratitude and deep appreciation for her courage, her determination, her grace, and her great humanity. Pat and Gerry were married in 1972. I met Gerry first when I called to see Pat in their flat in Lenadoon. He wasn't in. As usual, Gerry might reflect. And that's when I first became aware of Pat's view of himself as a wonderful athlete and a soccer star. And later I was to admire photographs of him kicking a ball. The photographs were in the toilet in their new home in North Belfast. During these turbulent years, Pat's reputation as a hard-working, conscientious, enthusiastic, successful and skillful lawyer were growing. Bhí sé faoi brú a gcónaí, ach mar níor cail sé a fith gran a riú. Despite all of the difficulties, he never lost his sense of humour, he never lost his quirkiness. He worked long, demanding hours under trying and difficult conditions representing his clients. He was a lawyer working within a unionist and British-dominated legal and judicial process in which torture, in which the beating of detainees was part and parcel of the system of arrest and interrogation. The conveyor belt system was perfected in the mid-1970s as part of Britain's criminalisation strategy. The Special Powers Act was replaced with, among other repressive laws, with the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the Emergency Provisions Act. Forced confessions, which were usually the only evidence presented, were readily accepted by non-jury diplock courts. Evidence of ill-treatment in Castlereagh, Gough Barracks, the Strand Road and other torture centres was brushed aside, ignored, dismissed to facilitate the imprisonment of hundreds of men and women. By the way, in 1972, when I was arrested, I was one of those beaten repeatedly in Palace Barracks. And later in 1974 in Springfield Road Barracks, I was beaten unconscious again and again and again. And I tell you that just to personalise this. British Secretary of State Roy Mason, the Chief Constable Ken Newman, issued weekly statements boasting of the numbers arrested. Newman claimed that the prisoners were beating themselves up to discredit the IUC. And during this time, Pat defended many political prisoners. Later, during the hunger strikes, he went on to represent Bobby Sands and the women in Armagh and the Fear Plud, the blanket men's interests. And the little columns, the Choctorachta, the chocks that were written in cigarette papers, or bits of the Gideon Bible, and smuggled back and forth between the Fear Plud and the Sinn Féin POW department, Pat was known as the Signer. Thug sé cuaird Bobby agus na blockan na hitch neart ura. He visited the blocks many, many times. He visited Bobby many, many times. He witnessed the signing of Bobby Sands' nomination papers for the by-election in Fermanagh and South Tyrone. And he and Bobby developed a deep and solid friendship. Forbert sé Cargus Dawn agus Lider le Bobby. And that's very, very clear if you read in the different writings that are there of Bobby, of the affectionate comments that he made to others on visits about Pat and his work for the prisoners. And later, when the Bobby Sands Trust was established, and when we began to publish Bobby Sands' writings, his short stories and poems, Pat was with Donnie Morrison and I at our first meeting with Captain John Feehan of Mercier Press. Pat was a member of the Bobby Sands Trust and our legal advisor. All the while, he was involved in a daily battle challenging the denial of rights to detainees. The beatings, the torture, the long periods of detention, the refusal to allow prisoners to speak with their lawyers. Let's reflect back. This was nothing new. This use of special courts, special laws, were all part and parcel of Britain's long experience of fighting colonial wars. After the Second World War, Britain was involved in at least 20 wars, which saw it withdraw from many former colonies, including Malaya, Kenya, Cameroon, Oman, Borneo, and Aden. I was telling people recently, as part of the Ballymurphy Massacre story, that the first banner unfurled by the British Army, by a British Army riot squad in the Murph to instruct people to disperse, that first banner was in Arabic. Sin and Erin, you no act na Gael needed, no act na Arabic and Sin. Brigadier Frank Kitson, who served in many of these wars, was the architect of Britain's counterinsurgency strategy here. This is all written down. This is not me making it up. The key objective of his strategy was to reshape the government, reshape the law, the judiciary, and the media, and to mould it into a weapon to subdue and suppress and pacify popular protest against their regime. And Kitson explains their thinking. He wrote, "The fundamental concept is that the working of the triumvirate, civil, military and police, as a joint and integrated organisation from the highest to the lowest level of policy making, planning and administration. In practice, this meant putting in place an overarching strategy to coordinate the legal, military, political and media operations of the state. This meant the use of special courts, of special laws, of interrogation methods, the control of the judiciary and legal system, investment, we all remember, those of us of a certain age, political vetting, the economy, and influencing the media. Kitson was a pioneer of psycho-ops, psychological operations, and media manipulation by briefing and spin. His objective and that of the British Army, RUC press operations in the Northern Ireland office, was to turn journalists, as one reporter told the Savile Inquiry, into useful mouthpieces. Kitson rationalised his counter-insurgency strategy and the use of death squads. He wrote, "Everything done by a government and its agents in combating insurgency must be legitimate. But this does not mean that the government must work within exactly the same sets of law during an emergency as existed beforehand. The law should be used as just another weapon in the government's arsenal, in which it becomes little more than a propaganda cover for the disposal of unwanted members of the public." Sinn Féin, all in that one paragraph. It becomes little more than a propaganda cover for the disposal of unwanted members of the public. That was exactly the opposite of Pat Finucane's understanding of the law. And that was the repressive system that he and other progressive lawyers had to constantly challenge. And every time Pat and the others identified a legal protection for citizens, the Brits simply changed the law. The result was an increasing arsenal of new and even more sophisticated and repressive laws, and all were designed to maximise the power of the state and reduce the rights of citizens. In the course of his work, Pat was at the forefront of the legal challenge to all these new coercive measures. By now, he and Peter Madden had founded their own firm, their own law firm, Madden and Finucane. Agus tá my answers to Peter Madden, Agoil and Shaw and New Falchamore, wrote Peter Madden. Pat was a familiar face on television news. He was televised leaving courts in Belfast, Lorgan, elsewhere. And many of those he was representing were the victims of the paid perjurer strategy, the families of shoot-to-kill victims, and citizens whose loved ones were killed as a result of state collusion with unionist death squads. And his devotion to human rights and Pat's diligence and his success made him a hate figure for many within the RUC and the British political establishment. They told unionist paramilitaries that he was a lawyer who was in the IRA. In November 1988, 4 senior officers of the RUC, including Chief Constable Jack Herman, the Deputy Head of the Special Branch, Brian Fitzsimmons, met with Junior Home Office Minister Douglas Hogg in Belfast. They told him that there were some lawyers in the north who were effectively in the pockets of terrorists. Hogg asked who. They identified Pat Finucane. 2 months later, on January the 17th, Douglas Hogg, in a committee stage debate in the British Parliament, said, "I have to state as a fact, but with great regret, that there are in Northern Ireland a number of solicitors who are unduly sympathetic to the cause of the IRA." Less than 4 weeks later, agents for the British Military Intelligence and the RUC Special Branch, agents of the state, paid for by taxpayers' money, also coincidentally members of the UDA, shot Pat and Geraldine in front of their children. And those who plotted and those who planned Pat's murder in the British government, within the RUC, in the British Army's Force Reconnaissance Unit, they thought, Sinead, that was it. They thought they'd silenced a good man, a Far Kroger, a brave man. They thought they had sent a clear signal, a clear warning to anyone else who dared to challenge them. But they reckoned without the courage and the resolve of Geraldine and the Finucane family and their many friends. They reckoned without the many families of victims of collusion who demanded and still demand truth. British government, their securocrats, their spies, their spooks have never been able to silence the Finucane family. Pat's name still haunts the corridors of power to this day. And together the family and you in this room and others in Britain and the USA and in Europe have been responsible for one of the most effective, high-profile and protracted justice campaigns ever mounted against the British security and political system and its apologists. Agus tá sógamsa go mé Pat an brúdóil le Geraldine agus a clán. I know that Pat would be enormously proud of Geraldine and his family and their amazing doggedness and tenacity in the face of indifference at times from the Irish government and countless efforts by successive British governments to marginalise and distract and silence them. In 2001, after years of campaigning, the British and the Irish government agreed at Weston Park to appoint a judge of international standing to undertake a thorough investigation into allegations of collusion in a number of cases, including the murder of Pat Finucane. A former Canadian judge, Peter Corey, was appointed to head this up. Later in 2003, the third report by John Stevens was published. Now, Stevens and his team were brought in here in 1989 again to investigate allegations of collusion. And they faced years of obstruction through their 3 separate investigations, including an attempt to destroy their files in January 1990. The facility the Stevens team was using outside Carrickfergus was regarded as one of the most secure policing facilities anywhere. And one evening, several of the Stevens team returned unexpectedly and discovered that the incident room was on fire. When they tried to set off the fire alarms didn't work. A heat-sensitive intruder alarm also failed. And when they ran to the guardhouse to phone for the fire brigade, they were told that the phones weren't working. Stevens and his team believed that those responsible for this attack of arson were from the Force Reconnaissance Unit, the unit responsible for running agents, including those who killed Pat Finucane. They also suspected that the Special Branch had helped through agents break into the office. John Stevens later said, "This incident, in my opinion, has never been adequately investigated, and I believe it was a deliberate act of arson." Later on he said, "In almost 30 years as a policeman, I've never found myself caught up in such an entanglement of lies and treachery." In his third report published in April 2003, Stevens dealt specifically with the murder of Pat Finucane on a Brian Adam Lambert. Brian Adam Lambert was a young Protestant university student who'd been shot by the UDA in November 1987 in mistake for a Catholic. Stevens concluded, and I quote, "I've uncovered enough evidence to lead me to believe that the murders of Pat Finucane and Brian Adam Lambert could have been prevented. I also believe that the IUC investigation of Pat Finucane's murder should have resulted in the early arrest and detection of his killers. I conclude that there was collusion in both murders and the circumstances surrounding them." Now, it's worth noting that a man called William Stobie was arrested several weeks after the killing of Adam Lambert. Stobie had supplied the weapon used to kill Adam. But instead of being charged, he was recruited as an agent by the IUC Special Branch. And 14 months later, he supplied the weapons used to kill Pat Finucane. John Stevens later said, of 110 people he arrested about Pat's murder, 107 were being paid by some branch of the British system. Out of 110, 107 were being paid as agents. I often wonder what happened to the other 3. In April 2004, Judge Corey published his findings and concluded that in 5 of the 6 incidents he had investigated, inquiries should now proceed. And this included Pat's murder. As John has said, all of these inquiries have now concluded, except Pat's. Never even started. The British government tore up its commitment to hold an inquiry into the death of Pat. And then, in time-honoured fashion, they also passed a new law, the Inquiries Act, in 2005, which gave ministers the power to block evidence to be given to an inquiry. Judge Corey accused the British of duplicity. He said, "It's like playing hockey. And instead of 6 to each team, you have 1 team with 8 and 1 with 4. And then in the middle of everything, you move the goalposts and you change the rules of the game." Lord Saville, who chaired the Bloody Sunday inquiry, also criticised the British government's decision. He said that giving a government minister the power to block evidence would make, and I quote, "a very serious inroad into the independence of any inquiry and is likely to damage or destroy public confidence in the inquiry and its findings. As a judge, I must tell you that I would not be prepared to be appointed as a member of an inquiry that was subject to that type of provision." So what are the reasons for all of this, for all of these machinations, for all of these manipulations by the British government, by successive British governments? Simply put, the Pat Finucane case goes to the heart of collusion and the British state and the British system in this part of our country. It exemplifies the use of collusion through its exposure of the connections between the British government, its military and intelligence agencies, the IUC and Unionist death squad. It exposes the use of these death squads at the highest level of government. The British government's involvement in the mass murder of citizens and in the smuggling of weapons into this country to facilitate this. And collusion wasn't just the occasional use of spies or agents by the British operating within the IRA or loyalist paramilitary organisations. Collusion was a matter of institutionalised practice by successive British governments. It involved the establishment of unionist paramilitary groups, the systematic infiltration by the British of all of these groups at the highest levels, the control and direction of these groups, arming them, training them, and providing them with information on the people to be killed. Brian Nelson is one such person. A British agent was placed very high as intelligence director into the UDA, was provided with up-to-date intelligence by his handlers in the Force Reconnaissance Unit, and they protected him even after he was arrested by the Stevens team. And as well as being directly responsible for the killing of Pat Finucane and at least another dozen or more people, Nelson and his military handlers were responsible for bringing in a shipment of weapons in 1987 to 1988 to Unionist paramilitaries from the old apartheid South African regime. And if you check the record, you'll see the increase in the killing of nationalists and Republicans immediately following that. I had to cut my remarks, obviously, today. As John has said, in October 2011, Geraldine and her family met David Cameron in Downing Street. And it was widely expected, and the media were being briefed, that the British Prime Minister was finally about to announce the much delayed public inquiry. Instead, he appointed a senior lawyer, Desmond De Silva, to review the papers in this case. And in his report, De Silva concluded in 2012 that members of the RUC had encouraged the attack on Pat Finucane, passed information on Pat to those who killed him, and failed to prevent his murder. And while the publication of the De Silva report was used as an excuse by the British government not to hold an inquiry, the evidence it presents in 829 pages only serves to reinforce the clear need for one. De Silva reported 85% of the intelligence that the UDA used to target people for murder was provided by the British Army and the RUC. There were 270 separate incidents of so-called leaks to the UDA between January 1987 and September 1989 from within the British Army, the UDR and the RUC. Agents working for MI5, RUC Special Branch and military intelligence were participating in criminality, including murder. There was no proper legal framework or guidelines to control the criminality of the actions of those who were called participating agents. The Brits' Northern Ireland office was, in De Silva's words, not overtly enthusiastic about attempts by some senior RUC and MI5 officers to introduce guidelines, despite representations at the highest levels. The issue was considered extensively at British cabinet level. Ministers were clearly aware that agents were being run without guidelines. The Director General of MI5 raised this matter with the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in 1988. And all of this, De Silva said, was a willful and abject failure by successive governments to run agents lawfully. In other words, leaving the diplomatic language to one side, there was a willful and abject decision to run them on lawfully. And of the many damning conclusions by De Silva, he says, the real importance, in my view, is that a series of positive actions by employees of the state actively followed and facilitated Pat Finucane's murder. And in the aftermath of the murder, there was a relentless effort to defeat the ends of justice. In other words, what the family were campaigning for, what others who had lost loved ones were campaigning for, was being deliberately and willfully opposed at all levels. However, to our surprise, perhaps, or not to our surprise, despite clear evidence of the involvement by the different strands of the state, he said there was no overarching state conspiracy to murder Pat Finucane. The British Prime Minister said he was deeply sorry for what had happened. And he pointed out, or used, or excused, by using de Silva's claim that there was no political conspiracy, to rule out a full public and independent inquiry. And Geraldine succinctly, accurately summed up the British government's efforts. Agus bhí an Deireach, agus an Leider, agus bhí go han solar. Geraldine was very clear, very strong, and very direct in what she said to this. She said, at every turn, dead witnesses have been blamed. Defunct agencies have been found wanting. Serving personnel and active state departments appear to have been excused. The dirt has been swept onto the carpet without any serious attempt to lift the lid on what really happened to Pat and many others. This report is a sham. This report is a whitewash. This report is a confidence trick dressed up as an independent scrutiny and given the invisible clothes of reliability. But most of all, most hurtful and most insulting of all, this report is not the truth. Well said, Geraldine. For almost 20 years, Pat Finucane battled every day in defence of the rights of his clients, and he did so in the face of an arsenal of repressive laws, as we have just outlined. And he did so against a system that does not believe that citizens have rights. It sees the law as just another weapon in its despicable campaigns. And today, the battle for the rights of citizens continues. The context, yes, is different. The rights issues may have changed, but the issue of rights for citizens, which was at the heart of Pat's efforts during his years as a human rights lawyer, is still as relevant today. These include prisoners' rights. There are other fundamental human rights available in every state on these islands except this one, which must be protected and advanced. These include marriage equality, Irish language legislation, women's reproductive rights, and legacy issues. And it's also true that the equality and parity of esteem components of the Good Friday Agreement have still not been implemented in full. There's a pressing need for a Bill of Rights as set out in the Good Friday Agreement, and which has been resisted by successive British governments and by the Unionist parties. And that is not good enough. A Bill of Rights is essential for the protection of citizens' rights, and Professor Colin Harvey, in a submission to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice and Equality on the issue of rights on a Bill of Rights, said just last month, it's apparent that aspects of the 1998 agreement around identity are not well understood and are not fully reflected in domestic law, policy and practice. And he called for a Charter of Rights for the island of Ireland, which is part of the Good Friday Agreement. In its submission to the Oireachtas Committee, the Committee on the Administration of Justice warned that Irish citizens in the North may be reduced to the status of second-class citizens after Brexit. The CHA pointed out that Irish citizens in the North will become EU citizens living, and I quote, in a non-member state, thus making their status constitutionally and practically uncertain and insecure. In December 2017, in the joint report produced by the European Union and the British government, paragraph 52 specifically stated that the people of the North who are Irish citizens will continue to enjoy rights as EU citizens, including where they reside in Northern Ireland. The Taoiseach stated at that time that everyone born in the North will continue to have the right to Irish and therefore EU citizenship. He also stated that the joint report was rock solid, cast iron and politically bulletproof. And in a response to a letter recently by representatives of civic nationalism, the Taoiseach assured them and us that the government had protected our interests. He said to all of us, Your birthright as Irish citizens, and therefore as EU citizens, will be protected. He went on to tell us, you will never again be left behind by an Irish government. Now that was very welcome and a very positive commitment, but it has to be more than a clever soundbite. Many now believe that this promise, including me, has been broken. The specific commitment to citizens who reside in the North is missing from the withdrawal agreement published last November, and I have raised this many times in the Dáil, and the Taoiseach is yet to explain why the rock-solid, cast-iron and politically bulletproof joint report commitment of December 2017 is missing. Last week, the government in Dublin published its European Parliament elections bill, legislating for the European elections which are due to take place in May. And the EU had allocated 2 additional seats to the Irish state. And Sinn Féin and others urged the Taoiseach to allocate these 2 seats to the North, to ensure that citizens here who voted to remain would continue to be represented in the European Parliament. The government in Dublin said no. And we'll attempt to amend this, although I don't hold my breath, in committee. And on the back of very strong representation from Sinn Féin and others, the Irish government, in its lobby of our European neighbours on Brexit, rightly stressed and stresses the centrality of the Good Friday Agreement to the outcome of the Brexit negotiations. Yet, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach repeatedly dismiss a part of that agreement. A referendum on Irish unity is a part of the Good Friday Agreement. It's a key provision and an integral part of that historic agreement. So the Irish government cannot cherry-pick the Good Friday Agreement. The days when citizens here in the North, when Irish citizens here in the North, would meekly accept second-class citizenship, they're gone. They're over. They're finished. And those days ended. Whatever had happened in his head, when the likes of Pat Finucane decided to make a stand. That's when it ended. It takes a bit of way to work these things out, but that's when it ended, when people decided to stand up. So today we have a continuum of struggle. And to achieve positive change and to defeat resistance to the absolutely correct demand for rights requires a constant need for vigilance and a long-headed view of the past and very, very especially of the future. Whose caimage a bheara a goni niart go cor le helia. Unity is strength. For example, whatever about our criticisms of the European Union, we can hardly imagine the European Union telling the British that they cannot leave the European Union. You couldn't imagine the European Parliament telling the British that they're going to suppress the British Parliament. They're going to do away with the Parliament at Westminster. That's what happened to us. When the people of Ireland voted to leave the British Empire, we were told you can't leave the British Empire. You have to stay in the British Empire. And when we elected the first Dáil 100 years ago, the British government suppressed it, outlawed it, and started a war. So I say all of that not for people in this room, but for the Taoiseach. That the Taoiseach needs to learn that it's not about Kew Grant. That the Taoiseach needs to learn the lessons of history. The Taoiseach needs to know that the British government doesn't have friends. It has interests, and it always acts in its own interest. So the Taoiseach has to stand up to the Brits and stand by the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts. He needs to have a consistent all-island vision. This is crucial. A consistent vision for the whole island of Ireland. He needs to have all-island objectives, because the Good Friday Agreement is an all-island agreement. In addition, he also has a responsibility, a constitutional responsibility, to promote the goal of Irish unity and to work to achieve it through democratic dialogue and negotiation. And we all know, we have all seen the threat that's posed to our rights and to our economies by the British, the English Tories. So this issue of rights is as important today as it was in Pat Finucane's time. And whether we're party political or not, the demand of all progressive people must be for a citizen-centred society in which everyone is equal under the law and where their rights and their entitlements are protected in the law. And all of us need to be part of that effort. We who are Republicans believe that this should include the basics of life, that it should be economic, it should be political and social, the right to a home, the right to a job, to access to education, to universal health care, to a clean and safe environment, to a life free from sectarianism. But whatever about that, I don't believe we're going to be able to fully achieve these rights until we have control of our own affairs, free from British involvement. And the Good Friday Agreement does set out a peaceful and democratic way to achieve that. So we're calling on the Irish government to establish a forum to sign up for the referendum on Irish unity, and unlike Brexit, to precede that with an informed and an inclusive debate. Sinn Féin, I just see, and you're always afraid to pick somebody out in case you miss somebody, but I just see PJ McGrory's daughter here. PJ was my lawyer for years, did an awful lot of terrific work. I see Slainer's wife here. I see lots of other victims of the conflict. And you know, one of the things that I admire about the Finucanes is that they, in my opinion, I've never discussed this with any of them, are using the skills and the high profile that Pat had to help everybody else who doesn't have the same abilities. And Geraldine has reared, as a single parent, as a widow, a wonderful family. In the face of British government intransigence, the abject failure of successive Irish governments, it's truly inspirational to know these people. And I've repeatedly asked successive Taoiseach, we see at the moment how we can use our diplomatic abilities in our common good. However that turns out is another story. But I've repeatedly asked the successive Taoiseachs, going right back to Bertie Ahern, to undertake an international campaign in which all of the Irish diplomatic services are enlisted to expose British complicity and to demand the inquiry that the Finucane family were promised. And to their shame, so far, they have refused. Yes, the Taoiseach may raise it, yes, in an occasional conversation on the margins of a meeting, but there's been no consistent, no planned, no strategic programme of work to mobilise international and diplomatic support for the public inquiry into Pat Finucane's murder. And that also is not good enough. It's a very reasonable demand. I want to wish Geraldine and her children and grandchildren well in these difficult times. And you know, I believe that you can rely on all of us throughout it all. And you know also that there are people here in this country and in Britain and in the USA who have supported you for the last 30 years. And will continue to do so. And that will be true when the British Supreme Court gives its judgment, which is due to do in the next short while. Pat was a decent human being. He dedicated his life to helping others. He was a family man. He loved Geraldine. He loved his 3 children. He loved his siblings. And in places where rights were constantly denied, Pat was a fighter for rights. Balake, he didn't need to do it. He didn't need to do what he did. Many of us, and I include myself in this, benefited from his bravery and his expertise. He was a hero. And today, the defence of human rights is important as ever. In our own place, in Gaza, in Africa, in Latin America, in other places. And, you know, just as I conclude, why does the British establishment go to such lengths to cover up its misdeeds? You ever wonder about that? Is it arrogance? Is it imperial values? They think they still have an empire. We're it. Is it racism? Is it some sort of superiority complex? Well, it's all of these, and it's more. But it also needs to protect its agents and its operatives, because be sure, the British and their allies use the same strategies in other theatres of war at this time, in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan. Wherever the British establishment engages in military operations, these methods are still being used, and the British establishment has a need to protect those who act on their behalf. So, there are also human rights defenders, lawyers, trade unionists, journalists, farmers, community voluntary activists throughout the world defending the rights of citizens. And it's important in this global battle for human rights that we all remember Pat Finucane. His life, his death are proof that one person, even at a huge cost for him and his family, that one person can make a difference. And we salute him for making a difference for us.